Okay, good morning and welcome to day 3 of this public inquiry. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, and I'll talk through the sessions in a moment. But if I just begin with the usual housekeeping matters, just to make you aware that this inquiry is very much a public inquiry and it is being live streamed. Also, the usual in respect of fire alarm, I'm not aware of any fire drills planned, so if you do hear the bell, please exit by the clearly signed route, which is effectively the way you came into the building. Okay, let me just firstly do a little bit of catch-up from actions yesterday before we get into the today's sessions. It was quite a busy day yesterday, and there were a number of actions and information requests. I think some of those have landed with the programme officer. Those of you who were here yesterday, remember I asked for confirmation around that government decision, I think related to the state's budget, which with regard to the provision of the minimum amount of affordable housing within this scheme. And I believe, Helen, can you confirm that was sent through, wasn't it? So we received that. I also asked for the information on median incomes in Jersey, and I think I was offered some slightly dated information, and I said I'd rather have the up-to-date information. I don't think we've seen that yet, have we? I also asked Mr. Nicholson to do a little bit of homework in terms of demonstrating that the quantum of floor space for the residential blocks, using the maximum parameter dimensions, was sufficient to accommodate the flats, the apartments, using the minimum space sizes set out in the Minister's draft SPG. And I was most impressed, Mr. Nicholson. It was about 10 o'clock last night. You sent a note through to the programme officer.
Thank the architect for his input as well. To that.
Right, okay, well, thank you to that. I've only skimmed it, but it looks to me as if you've done exactly what I asked you to do. Do you want to just explain that to me? And I think it will probably benefit Ms. Johnson as well.
Yep, the notes was circulated to the programme officer and the planning authority. The total floor space within the full residential extent of the plots is set out in a table, page 129 of the DAS. That also includes the number of units and the mix of units. So we took on board the worst case, the largest numbers from the emerging data the emerging SPG in relation to 1, 2 and 3 bedroom units. We multiplied that by the number of units shown in that table to get a figure for the actual residential demise within the building. As a kind of a rule of thumb, our architect said that in a building you would expect a kind of net to gross ratio where the areas of demise were usually about 80% of the total floor space, the balance being common parts, stair cores, servicing, corridors, etc. All the buildings and the floor spaces are comfortably within that 80% threshold. There is generous flexibility, typically over 10%. So validating the position that the architect has worked to all along, that the units can be comfortably accommodated within the proposed floor space of each.
Okay, and just for my double checking, the figures in that table that you referred to, they are the floor space figures for purely the residential. They don't include any commercial floor space.
Correct, sir. The table is split into 2 parts, the left-hand side being the residential, the right-hand side being the other floor spaces. We have taken just the left-hand side.
Okay, thank you. And what you described as the worst case, the worst case is from a I understand what you're saying, but from a future resident's perspective, that's probably the best case. You're working on the...
We've worked on the largest format of each unit prescribed in the emerging standards.
Okay, and there's some relevance there to the discussion we had about daylight and sunlight, because some of the responses to that are bigger units, bigger windows. And so obviously, the planning authority, you only just received that, your opportunity to have a look at it. If I don't hear from you, I'll assume that it's accepted as common ground as a factual statistical analysis. But if you've got any issues with it after reviewing it, please let me know via the programme officer, and we can round it up perhaps at the end of the week under other matters. But that was helpful. Can you remind me, was there anything else outstanding from yesterday?
Yes, sir. We have been tasked to see if we can provide some common ground in relation to a density figure.
Oh, that's right.
And,
yes.
There was some toing and froing between within our teams and through the planning authority as well. And in a exchange of emails again during the course of the evening and the conversation this morning, we are going to hopefully get that resolved at lunchtime, when Alistair Coates will be with us for other matters. And so that is in hand, and we're just broadening the team to see if we can use their wisdom as part of the process.
That's really helpful. We're all going to be tired at the end of this week, I can tell.
So might I just check, you, in relation to the median incomes information, were you expecting that from Ms. Day?
Yes, I was. Yes.
I will follow up with her this morning. Thank you.
Okay, and before we get going then on the transport session, could I be updated on statements of common ground, which seem to be arriving rather late in the day?
Yes, sir, that is the case. We have provided the programme officer with copies of statements of common ground in relation to transport. The witnesses have been working on that. I believe there's been crossover periods of annual leave, which has involved people actually dedicating time to this whilst they were on holiday, which I'm grateful for. That has been agreed and is circulated with the programme officer. I hope so. You've been provided with a paper copy. I've got extras if you...
It just landed on my desk a few moments ago.
Thank you very much. We also have a brief statement of common ground on drainage. My understanding is that has been agreed with between our technical drainage team and the relevant consultee within the Government of Jersey. I also understand that has not been validated by the planning authority, and they may be able to clarify exactly where we are with that.
Yeah. In terms of the drainage statement of common ground, I received that when I came to the inquiry room this morning. It doesn't mean that it has to be held up as an agreed document. I'm perfectly happy for that to be considered agreed. And if there are any particular aspects that the planning authority want to clarify or come back on, we will do that in the session this afternoon. And I would just say that's similar with the transport statement of common ground. There are a couple of points that we just wanted to make comment on, which Mr. Jones will do with the planning authority this morning.
Okay, I've just skimmed the statement of common ground for drainage, which is very brief, but it's also, I think, very helpful, and it may condense our session on those matters.
I've got one further as well, sir. There is a statement of common ground in relation to coastal matters, which I believe is similarly brief, and that has also been circulated this morning. I believe the context is exactly the same.
I haven't seen that.
In relation to a review by the planning authority, but I believe it is with the programme officer.
Okay.
Has a copy been provided to us, because we also haven't seen that? Thank
Okay, right. Okay, that's helpful as catch up on where we are. Right, let me get organised. So we've got actually 4 sessions today. It's going to be a long day for those of us who attended all of them. I did say yesterday when we were drawing to a close that because we have the evening session which starts at 6 o'clock, I really do not want to be running till 5:30 or even 5 o'clock. We need a bit of a break before that session. So in terms of transport, which is our first session, session 7, it's obviously a huge topic area. There is a lot to discuss, but it was clear to me from my review of the submitted evidence, particularly the transport assessment and the highway authorities' statement of case and proof of evidence, that there was quite a lot of common ground on the technical matters in terms of how the transport impacts had been assessed and modelled and mitigation measures. And there were inevitably a whole load of issues that fell out the end where more detail was required. And from a very quick skim of the transport statement of common ground that I've just been handed this morning, it feels that chimes with what I've read so far. There are, though, clearly quite a lot of topics here that are going to be of public interest, and we will no doubt have quite a lot of questions on some of the issues. I'm going to revert to the conventional format in this session of seeking the applicant's evidence first, and then we'll have questions. And I think it's important that we do it in the sort of bite-sized pieces that we've got on the programme. So we're going to start off with kind of like the technical assessment of traffic generation impacts and mitigations. Then we're going to have a discussion about public and private parking, which is a really complicated area and raises all sorts of different issues. The site clearly has an awful lot of temporary surface parking at the moment, which serves a variety of needs. And there's this whole debate around how much parking should be provided with new developments, whether they're commercial or residential developments. And there is some recent draft supplementary planning guidance that we need to consider in that respect. We're then going to talk about accessibility, including emergency services. I believe we've got the ambulance service and the fire service represented today, and it will be useful to take their input on the scheme in terms of emergency issues, particularly when you've got a very large basement area proposed and how emergencies would be dealt with. Then we're going to have a discussion which I think has come up on a number of occasions already this week, which is about connectivity of the site to the town centre. And those familiar with the planning history will know about the vision in the past for putting the road in a tunnel and having a sort of seamless transition between the town centre and the waterfront. And the proposal that we have today does propose enhanced pedestrian crossing and some landscaping, but we've heard a number of contributors making comments about the harshness of that road, the size of it, and whether those connections are satisfactory. I want to hear that because it's really quite an important issue. And then the final item is around active travel, pedestrian and cycling facilities and travel plans. And I think my steer to particularly the main parties is you don't need to restate a lot of the stuff which will be pretty much obvious. You don't need to make the case that this is a very sustainable location for major new development. I think you can take that as a given. And equally, I don't need to get into the weft and weave of the very complicated modelling, particularly given that it tends to be a common ground. I might have some one or two questions on that. So I'm going to stop there in terms of my introductory comments and really just hand over to the applicants team to introduce their witness and pick up that first subject of assessment of traffic generation impacts and mitigation. And you may want to use the Statement of Common Ground as a reference document. I assume that those matters are covered in that.
So thank you very much. I think that was a very good introduction. I think the first thing to acknowledge is the significant amount of work that has gone into the highways and transportation considerations as part of the application. I think that's evidenced by the work that's been going on up until very recently to get a Statement of Common Ground produced. We're very grateful for the ongoing willingness to engage through the IHE team. That engagement has not just been on technical highways grounds with the development authorities, but I think we've already discussed the issues around the road, and there has been a great deal of time and effort invested in getting up to date and responding to the Jersey Architecture Commission and their feedback. And so this is a key topic, and we are really pleased with where we've reached. I think it's evidence of the hard work that's gone into it. So from our side, Dan Hyde, WSP, has been leading that work, and I can hand over to Mr. Hyde to move this topic forward.
Morning, Mr. Hyde.
Good morning. Thank you. I think really to start with, obviously a huge amount of work, as Mr. Nicholson said, has gone into this. It has followed what we'd call more a traditional approach of looking at what the development is proposing in terms of all those units and what they're doing. It has then gone through the trip generation process following standard practice, looking at exemplar sites, what they would generate in a typical example in the same sorts of settings across the UK and across Jersey to understand what they would generate. We've then used census journey to work, census information, along with existing traffic counts to determine the likely distributional patterns that would associate with those trips. That data has been fed through into a spreadsheet model, a very comprehensive spreadsheet model, to do a first cut of what that would look like and the impacts on the existing network and also then into the future. That has also then gone into what we'd call a strategic model, looking in a bit more detail, and then to what we would call operational models, micro-simulation models, to assess in detail the performance of each individual junction and links between our site and the wider network to understand how the trips would permeate through the local network, as well as then how the network would react to these changes. And through that work, it's concluded that the development with the location that you've already noted would have a fairly car-light impact. It would have a relatively few arrivals and departures during the main peak periods. Compared to the size of it, we're sort of below 100 vehicles in those peak periods, arriving, departing for the residential part of the development. Obviously, the development includes the relocated public parking, which we'll touch on, I think, on a later topic. But again, that can be brought into those numbers. So the trip generation and the modal share has moved fairly heavily into active and sustainable transport. So large amounts of walking, cycling, some use of buses, around about 4%, as shown through our transport assessment work, to conclude that the junction would have a fairly light impact on car trips, similar to levels to today. But through that work and the mitigation that it found was obviously improvements to the connectivity. So having the new crossing across Route de Libération, also the upgrading of the Castle Street junction in terms of active travel. So we've got a couple of proposals there for mitigation, one being more of a Dutch-style roundabout, another being a much more enhanced shared use facility for both walking and cycling and wheeling, so that we can get more people crossing safely, securely and efficiently. The new crossings that are proposed are single-stage direct crossings, so cross all lanes in one go, and also an improvement to the Gloucester Street junction as well, as up to West Park into the other connectivity. So a huge amount of work's been done on trying to balance the needs for the development and what can go on, but also enabling the existing users to get through that area without impacting the economic viability of those other trips that are in existence. So balancing users' needs and competing demands.
Thank you. And just to save time, could I get to Mr. Hayward and say, all that agreed?
Yeah, pretty much so. I mean, great thanks to the team who actually engaged with us early on this project. They've been... Can't hear. Yeah, so just wanted to say thank you to the team who have engaged with us early on this project. It's been a long-running sort of matter, the evolution of the southwest of St Helier. Particularly traffic is of a key interest with this site, given the quantum of development. They've been very good at sort of working with us and following the government's stated policy aims, namely the sustainable transport policy and the Bridging Island Plan. So we've taken a view to try to follow the guiding principle that fewer car journeys are good for Jersey with this development. And they've been very good at sort of coming up with proposed solutions that meet that general policy direction.
Okay, if I could just ask Mr. Hyde a couple of questions which may particularly assist the members of the public. Firstly, I did say I don't want to delve into the weft and weave of complex traffic modelling, but one area I do want to test, and I've tested it before with other consultants, is when you draw trip generation data from UK sources, particularly TRIX, and whether that translates to Jersey, which is a little bit different, isn't it? Discuss, please.
Certainly, there are some differences. There are some very significant similarities in that we have a development. We have undertaken traffic surveys, so turning counts, who's doing what throughout the day, and over long duration. So we have confidence in the sort of numbers of people that are moving around and in the sort of modes that they're moving around. We've been fortunate to use information that IHE have shared with us in terms of occupancy data over the years, as well as other modal studies that have built up this information. So keen to stress that it's a lot of local relevant data that has gone into this picture. What we don't have in the same depth is that picture of understanding each individual development that's here and having a survey directly to those. That's where the TRIX database, which is, yes, grant you, largely a UK development, but it's across the UK, and I think it's very comparable from the evidence that we've reviewed and have done in other similar applications, that it compares well. So the blend of that information and the sense checking leads us to say this is a robust assumption and obviously gives us confidence in what we're putting forward.
Mr. Hayward, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the main differences in Jersey is there's sort of subtleties around car ownership. We know that there's more cars per capita here than certain areas in the UK, but the applicants chosen the sites that best represent the sort of waterfront development as proxy developments in the UK to make those assumptions. So we've sort of checked those. It's also been quite useful to have those sites to call upon because they represent really mixed-use sites in the UK, which this one is, of course. So you've got that taking into account that there'll be a certain amount of trips sort of crossed over within a development as opposed to just all of it going into or out of a development.
Okay. Okay, my next question, Mr. Hyde, before I go to members of the public. I appreciate this is a development that take a long time to implement. We've had 10, 12 years or whatever. But if you could just, particularly for the benefit of the public, just help explain that if you take the existing situation, which everybody will be familiar with, and within the site there is clearly a degree of trip generation associated with the leisure uses, the surface car parks, which will be quite tidal when they morning and evening. And then if you could just flick a switch and the development was in place with its traffic generation, replacing all of that, what would be the changes that people would witness day to day in terms of the network? Where would there be congestion points? Would there be more delays? Could you paint a picture of that?
So from the work that we've done, we're predicting about 121 extra vehicles in the morning and about 146 in the evening in terms of vehicles. In terms of walking and cycling, we're looking around about 1,000 extra movements in the morning and around about 1,700 into the evening. So obviously a lot of the area is predominantly residential, so we've got those trips out to employment, to schools, to all of those traditional things that we'd see in that morning, coming and goings. We've got obviously an active ground floor level and some commercial elements within the larger mixed use that are seeing, again, those incoming trips to those users. With, again, the leisure and the other side of things, we've got more trips into the evening. So the evening area sees a little bit more increase, which is why you'll see those numbers are higher into the evening. So we've got a real mix of what's going on. What we don't see is any significant congestion points, and I think that's key to traffic or car light development that we're proposing. What we do, however, see through the simulations, and I think it's worth noting, is the end-to-end journey times through Route de Libération, say from the tunnel through to West Park, as part of the proposals, get slightly longer. We're circa a minute longer. I think that's worth flagging because of the extra time for getting people across Route de Libération and focusing on active travel and a really improved connectivity to town. I know it's still, and we'll come on to it later, that road is still there. We're trying to balance the needs of everybody. So there is a slight reduction in journey efficiency through the corridor because of the signalised crossings that we're introducing through that section. So a little bit slower journey times, not really any significant changes in junction congestion capacity. Obviously, Rue de Port Elizabeth, Rue de Tay, with the main access into the site, both for the basement parking and for the relocated commuter parking, is all through that section. So some increases locally there to the order of, I've said, sort of below 150 trips.
Okay, so that journey delay for a driver then coming from the tunnel heading to St Alban or wherever, you're saying that the effect of that pedestrian connectivity, you've got a single phase, stop all the traffic as people walk across, that's going to add a minute or so to those journeys?
On average, that was adding a minute at peak time to those journeys, yeah, and that's something that we've worked quite closely with IHE to sort of calibrate what that might mean and the impact and how acceptable that might be to the wider travelling public and getting a balance between providing that connectivity.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hayward, is there anything you want to add before I go to the public and see?
No, just that really accords with the mobility hierarchy that's in our sustainable transport policy. So we've taken the view that the increased amenity for pedestrians is to be prioritised above effectively the delay for the car drivers. So by creating the facilities for walking, cycling, vulnerable road users, for example, you encourage people to undertake journeys via those modes. So therefore, the sort of trade-offs that you have to balance between the impact on the cars on the roads versus the people and the cyclists crossing is worthwhile.
Okay. I'm sure we'll come back to this later when we discuss that, connecting the site to the town centre. We'll deal with that again later, but that's been really useful. Okay, so for members of the public wishing to ask a question, I do want to make sure we keep this quite tight and we don't go all over the place. So this item that we're talking about here is really about the traffic modelling and assessments that have been done. If you've read them, you're brave and you've got a good brain to work through them. I'm afraid I have to do it, and I am quite familiar with them. They are quite hard work if you're not used to them, but they have you've heard from the discussion at the front that the applicants have undertaken a lot of technical work on the road network. They've done a lot of surveys to inform that, and they've used that to model the effects of the development on the road network. And you heard the questions I was asking was to try and to sort of tease out for your benefit, well, what does that actually mean in practice? And something I have to give great note to is the fact that the Highway Authority have been involved in that assessment, and they are in agreement with it. So at the moment, you can sense some of the summary points that I'm going to be making in my report to the Minister. Mr Young, you go first.
Thank you, sir. I've taken note of your caution there about content. I think I was grateful for your last question there, which really asked what is the likely practical impact on how users of the area will notice the difference. I particularly saw a gap in that, which I would like to know what the approach is. Here we've got an application which is a long-term plan, which we've heard is going to be the framework for new applications over 12 years. Now, what we heard is that we've seen the modelling, which I'll leave to the experts, has assessed the impact of extra chip generations from the residential and from the leisure and from the commercial as presumably the content of this development. My concern is about heavy vehicle movements. Not only do we get what you might call local traffic of car movements, but this area is where, if you like, situated bang next to our harbour, where huge amounts of HGV traffic goes through that road and the various junctions and has to mix in with all of the residential traffic and so on, which is already a severe problem, and we're going to cover that later about connectability. But we know that the ports of Jersey have said that they don't have adequate space and facilities for the current port. It's well short. There are many areas where we will need to do more importation, construction material and others, and they're proposing to produce, the current proposal is that they are going to move the commercial quay, which is where the lift-on ferries discharge in a new location at harbour, which to my mind is going to certainly have an impact on the amount of traffic emerging into this local network here. And I want to know, how is it that we've got a long-term plan based on assessing what is in this scheme, which is only part of the story, right bang next to where there are major plans of government to increase the amount of HGV traffic coming in and out of that area? So to me, they don't quite join up. To me, this adds to the case of why one questions approving an application which sets the framework for 12 years when there are missing elements of it, and this is just one, sir. So I'd like to hear what the technical response to that challenge is, sir.
Okay, well, Mr Hyde, do you want to take that first?
So, if I may, yes. So I think key to point out, we are very well aware of the port's proposals and the master plans. We have been working with the team. They're developing their proposals. We've had some workshops with them to discuss and understand what they're doing and them to understand what we're doing. So collaborating on those changes. So we're comfortable that we've taken account of what they're proposing to do within our proposals as best we can at this stage. I think it's worth also noting that the consolidation of the services there would mean a reduction in trips between the two sites that the harbour has, which actually reduces trips on route to Port Elizabeth, and then obviously intensification starts to build that back up again. So and I'm at risk of talking for what the ports are doing, but in terms of what they're doing, it's not a huge change in their numbers using route to Port Elizabeth and our access route. It was more change in operations. So I think that's key to understand the context. Obviously, that master plan is out as a consultation and is ongoing. I also think it's worth noting that the modelling, as I say, that we've done has accommodated what they're proposing, and our mitigation proposals at Castle Street Roundabout, for example, have taken into account the swept path analysis, the vehicle tracking of HGV movement, so that design enables those movements to be performed safely and efficiently through that junction. So from our point of view, we feel that we've taken that into account within the proposed approach and within the numbers that we have.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
I'm just not going to repeat what John said, but I absolutely agree with him. We, have to go back to the fundamentals on this project. When you do a project of this scale, you carry out an environmental impact assessment. When you do that, you prepare a scoping document in consultation. So part of that would be somebody like me saying, actually, what analysis do we want carried out? What comparisons do we want analysed so we can compare them? So a simple one would be the amount of traffic on this road, and you can agree or disagree, is similar to there's more traffic going down the Strand in London in a day, in 24 hours, than there is here. And the Strand's at grade. So where's the comparison between the road at grade that people can walk across? You don't need all those slip roads. You get all that land back, and you can build more affordable housing. So these are the comparisons. So I do stress, it's not like this is what you're getting, public, and this is the analysis. The second thing is about, and as an engineer, doesn't matter how brilliant I am doing analysis, if rubbish comes in, it's rubbish out. And as John has talked, rubbish in, rubbish out. This is rubbish. Now, I'm not getting into the technicality of the analysis. The next thing I've got to do is the word assessment. And I'll add to that independent assessment, which is fundamental policy, and it's part of the memorandum agreement for the developer with the government, is making sure there is a separation between the two. So we have the consultant, we also have the traffic engineer. Now this road, the whole site is owned by the public. We have a motorway going in the middle of it. That motorway is the responsibility, and its pavements and its crossings, the Department of the Environment. And you're from the Department of the Environment. Transport is under the Department of Environment.
Infrastructure and environment.
Yes, infrastructure. So they represent the client, also the operator of this road. And their job is to move traffic, right? So that's number one. Who assessed under the environmental impact assessment is traffic? Who independently assessed the EIA on traffic? Who in this department did it?
In terms of reviewing the
Yeah.
submission,
Yeah.
that was myself and the team.
So this is the problem. No criticism. It's not a criticism. Stress. I'm not criticizing you, but this is the problem. How can you have the same person that is responsible for the road assessing their own work? I'm sorry, you don't have that. So I'd call upon an independent assessment of the traffic. The other aspect about modelling is people movement modelling. Yes, you do the analysis of cars driving around like a little train set or whatever, scale electrics, but we use people modelling. We did space syntax, or it's well known, we've been doing it 30 years, we've been modelling people movement, and if you do this activity, people move over here, you get more footfall here, you get this and that. Has anybody done any pedestrian movement modelling? Has anybody done it? Is there any to inform the design? It's all about, this is a fundamental. And why are you denying this? This is all about connectivity. If your opening statement at the Jersey Architecture Commission, if I have to repeat them again, said the most important aspect of this plan is connectivity, and this barrier, and this road, and the traffic. And you have not done the work. Why are you denying it? Because you don't like the information. That's why, isn't it?
Mr McCarthy, I think that's a different matter that we're going to come on to later.
No, but I'm trying to talk about analysis, which is, you've asked me to. Transportation analysis goes side and side with pedestrian movement analysis. Am I correct in that statement for this scales scheme?
Sorry, say that again?
When you carry out, the sole purpose of doing traffic analysis is to run the modelling, so you look at vehicles driving around streets. The second thing you run in parallel is the movement of pedestrians, because the two work in hand, because obviously more pedestrians crossing a road is going to generate more, it's going to affect the traffic. But you must have both modelling. We do not have at all zero pedestrian analysis, and that technology is available and has been for the last 30 years. So, question I've got, why didn't you do the analysis?
I think they have done the analysis. Mr. Hyde can explain that. But when I asked the question about the delay in traffic speed, traffic journeys from the tunnel to St Albin or whatever, and you said about a minute or so, clearly in your modelling, you've assumed X number of pedestrians and cyclists using that at-grade crossing. They press the button and it's going to stop the traffic for so long, and that has gone into your model.
That's correct. So we have done baseline surveys of pedestrian cycle users along and across the roads within our modelled area, and we have those within our model. So we model all of the pedestrian cycling crossing and interacting with the traffic within the roads. So we know how often the traffic signals will need to be called and can program that in. So we have undertaken pedestrian and cyclist modelling within the context of the road crossings.
Yes, and so what he's got is measured the existing. We're talking about 5,000 people, 6,000 people living on the site, okay? So what you do is you predict, you need to predict. And to predict, you use the pedestrian modelling software, which you haven't used. So as far as I'm concerned, this is over the next 10 years. So why aren't we using and helping the islanders use the very best technology to inform the design? Why not? But you haven't done it. So I want to be absolutely clear. You haven't done it. And why didn't you do it? To inform the design.
Again, so if I may, quite clear, we have undertaken the assessment of generation of trips from pedestrians and cyclists. And they have been forecast. They have been measured as a baseline. We have forecast through the trip generation process, so we know what will be there at the end state of the development, and that has gone into the modelling and the assessment work that we have done. So I'm not quite sure that the disconnect.
What I'm trying to say is that the technology is available where you can compute, forecast, human movement, much more than just counting people on the streets. It's to do with the activities. Obviously, a swimming pool or the type of uses on the site are going to completely change the movement of people. There was a school on this site, we completely changed. And that's what these tools are, but you haven't used those tools. You haven't, because I haven't seen it. Well, if you have done it, please send it to me, because it hasn't been done.
As part of the evidence within the transport plan and the appendices, you'll see our trip generation, and that isn't just car-based, it's multimodal, so it does project into the future the changes in walking and cycling across the site, across each land use, and you'll see those numbers and how that ties up to large increases. In terms of active travel, we're in the evening peak, as I've said, we're just over 1,600 people crossing and interacting across route deliberation on those crossings at condensed points. So it is something that we have, and it's documented within the TA. Yes,
but it's... Anyway, I'd say you haven't carried out a space syntax pedestrian analysis. You haven't. And you should have done.
Let's leave it there. Anybody? Mr. Vibart, next question.
Thank you, sir. I'm on the Roads Committee of the parish of St Helier, and I want to express my disappointment that no one from our Roads Committee on the technical side is present, and on that basis I wouldn't want you to believe that we're not concerned about it. and I believe we have already put in writing quite a detailed analysis of how we see some of the problems that exist. The major problem being that it's a major entry east and west into St Helier and a main traffic thoroughfare. And no matter what traffic planning shows, I can only speak from the personal experience of being on the Roads Committee, that we have constant problems of traffic in this particular area. And we cannot see how the addition of a large number of people into the area who will want to own a car. One of the problems that there is in that area is there's a belief that if you live in St Helier, you shouldn't own a car. And that's almost an official position. But people of St Helier like to get out of St Helier. People who live in these flats are going to work in places like Helier School, Kennervay School, all different places in the island that they'll want to get to. So there's this idea that because these flats are in the middle of the town, nobody's going to want a car. In addition to everything that's there, including the point that John's made about the harbour, is it's also the bus station. So all the buses come into this area. So I can only impress on you, sir, that traffic in St Helier is an absolute nightmare, and trying to control it, the slightest hold-up, the slightest car praying anywhere in the ring road creates a gridlock that can take half an hour to an hour to sort out, and it's incredibly frustrating. So I would ask if you would take note of what our Roads Committee have submitted to you and recognise that there is some real problems in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vibert.
So if I might briefly, the comments from the Roads Committee are submitted to the application. They're available to review online. They are, in my reading, primarily very supportive. They raise some operational matters about road ownerships, particularly the absence of a policing authority, which reflects some previous issues that have been on parts of Rue de l'Eto. They are for you to consider, sir, as part of your assessment. The only thing I would note is the deviation that the Roads Committee have from what might be considered the purest position from the STP on the amount of car parking required.
Yes.
Thank you.
I was just going to confirm, sir, that the parish were invited to come along and attend and speak this morning. In fact, we emailed them as early as, I think, Monday, just to confirm their attendance, but I think everybody's here, so...
They were identified on the attendance list, and I think Mrs. Johnson identified that she had been chasing for an attendee as well.
Yes. The consultation response I have from them is quite dated now. I think it's February 22. Is there anything more recent?
I've got 22nd of Feb 23.
Ah, hang on a sec.
That is on the planning register. I'm not sure how it may be reproduced.
Yes, I've got that.
Yeah.
There were two with the same number, an A and a B document. Yeah, I've got that. Yeah, from Mr. Alvis. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any more questions? No, that's good. Okay. Sorry, let me just check my notes before I move on. Yes, Mr. Hyde, just before we leave this first subject of traffic generation impacts and mitigations, could you just give a quick, brief summary of those mitigations? What are they?
So the main point is that the traffic generation doesn't introduce any congestion hotspots. So from a congestion and traffic point of view, there are no mitigation measures. From a connectivity and from a active travel, the main mitigations are the improvements at the Castle Street Junction, Castle Street Roundabout, and we put forward two options, one as a shared walk-cycle facility, and the other as a Dutch-style kind of segregated cycling facility around the outer edge of the roundabout and slight narrowing down of the junction. So that's the predominant one that impacts the Castle Street Junction. The other improvements are the new at-grade crossing at the sort of side of the Esplanade, linking into the main square of the development, and then also improvements to the Gloucester Street Junction. Those are the three main areas.
But they're mainly around pedestrian movement. They're not around, because your modelling has sought to demonstrate that there's not going to be huge impacts in terms of clogging up the
Correct.
streets. And
yes, we don't.
You're not having to re-engineer for to mitigate those effects.
Correct. We're not putting up any of the capacities above the thresholds that would require mitigation.
Right. Okay. Let's move on then to discuss the thorny issue of public and private parking. Mr. Hyde, if you lead off on this, there's quite a lot of there's quite a wide range of issues to cover it in that topic, but give it a go.
Great. So we have obviously both the parking types. From a point of view of the dwellings, we have set quite a low threshold of 0.39 spaces per dwelling, which is introducing that car light process. That's reduced and through challenge, including challenge from the JAC, we've reduced down to that number. That includes allocated spaces for those that wish to, but we've decoupled those from the units, so that would be as people wish to come forward to purchase spaces separately. So a relatively low car usage, offset by high cycle parking and provisions for cycling and active travel. Within that, we are also proposing 21 car club spaces initially, which we felt appropriate within the development space itself, supported by the existing and predicted future provision more widely. And then we'll probably touch on it separately, but the re-provision of the public parking. And then within the commercial space, we've got a number of spaces, 85 spaces for the non-residential, so the commercial and operational performance requirements. And then other uses across the site are shown to use the existing public parking provisions, be that within the development itself or within the wider St Helier area, depending on where people are coming into the site from. So when we put this together, we were under the very dated parking standards, and there was also a draft parking standards in place as well, unofficially, but we have reviewed all of that and determined what we felt was appropriate based on the locations, the existing guidance and best practice. And then subsequently, the updated parking standards have been shared, consultation drafts shared, and we've reviewed the work that we've done there to ensure that what we're proposing is within the lines of what that's seeking to change and set the new standards to. So we feel that the location supports the low provisions that we have, or relatively low position that we have. So in conclusion, that 384 residential spaces at 0.39 dwellings per dwelling, and then 85 non-standard, non-operational, or non-residential operational spaces. Apologies.
And what was the public parking number?
The public parking figure is 335, and that's split between spaces at the revised Waterfront Gardens, the existing parking there, and also then some in the basement.
Okay. Mr. Hayward, do you want to say anything about what you've just heard?
No, we've obviously engaged with the applicant early on in terms of finalising the public parking numbers. It is going to represent a reduction in public parking on this site, though they've undertaken an assessment to check for existing capacity within GOJ car parks, and we're satisfied that there is some. There are busy times of the year with parking, particularly when everyone's Christmas shopping or it's rainy days in summer holidays, for example. But we've asked them to assess what is normally a sort of traffic neutral period, so it represents typical conditions throughout the year. So we think fairly happy with the numbers. Yeah, and generally the sort of proposed approach, it sort of accords with our sort of desire to see fewer motor vehicle trips in a development. Just to address what Mr. Vibert was saying a minute ago about the sort of rights of sort of town residents to visit outside of the town. I believe there's a number of car club spaces that are also going to be proposed in the development, which will make more efficient use of the car parking spaces by providing greater access to sort of residents to use cars as and when they need them, as opposed to having cars just parked up throughout the entire day.
Okay. In terms of public parking, I can't find it, but somewhere in the St Helier SPG, I'm sure there was reference to a minimum number.
It's in the appendices at the very end.
Is it?
It's a draft, so I don't think the body of the document quite correlates with the table. It's got a yellow header from memory.
Have you got it in front of you? Do you know what page it is?
The minimums were 0.25. I don't have it in front of me.
With the SPG, it's page, the draft parking standards, it's page 20, the
20.
table, appendix 3C.
Sorry, also the South West St Helier Framework SPG, page 25, paragraph A 1.5, confirms the public car parking spaces.
Oh, apologies, we're talking about two different things. That's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
It's
Yes, so the SPG A1.5 says, to this end, at least 520 public car parking spaces should be provided within the Esplanade Quarter area. This could be achieved by splitting the provision in or across the site, key opportunity sites 2 and 3. It does go on to say the actual number of public car parking spaces required to be provided may be reviewed in the light of current planning policy and associated guidance, and as work progresses on the government's sustainable transport strategy. So it's there's a fair bit of wriggle room in there. I'd like some comment on that, along with the issue that's raised in the evidence around Patriotic Street car park and the hospital. Mr. Hyde, do you want to go first on that?
So what we've done with the public parking is absolutely correct. The 520 spaces as per the SPG, which suggests that that can be looked at, which we've done. We did an assessment using the available data on car park usage and surplus, and that indicated that there was over 236 spaces in the immediate area within Patriotic Street and some of the smaller sites that was surplus on a regular basis. That suggested that we could use some of that spaces to reduce the quantity that would be provided in this area. We took a sort of a reduction in that around about the 200 number, and then we've applied factors onto that using best practice and examples from other sites around policy changes, such as understanding what the sustainable transport policies would introduce and how that might reduce that figure further, which has reduced the number that we were proposing down to that 320 number as something that was into the future, recognising that this would be coming in at a point where the sustainable transport policy was well embedded. People were changing patterns, but also able to use other parking locations. I think we as a team had a fallback team. Obviously, we know the uncertainty with the hospital proposals, and should that change, then we had a fallback for providing that difference within the development itself.
Okay. Mr. Hayward, agree?
Yep, agree with all of that. I don't think I've got anything further to add.
Could just, the risk of opening a Pandora's box here, that just turn to Mr. Hayward and just ask about future demand management and modal shift, because I've been coming to Jersey for quite a few years now, and I've got to know the place and I think understand its quirkiness. And one of the oddities that I see as an outsider coming in is incredibly high car ownership rates on a very small island. Despite the fact you've got pretty good public transport. I know that does appreciate where you start from, but you know, good bus service, and a very good cycling and walking environment. Longer term, what are the state's thoughts in terms of your strategies on sustainable travel? Are you going to take control of the number of cars? How are you actually going to get that modal shift? Because it's a much bigger issue than this development. This development can, if it goes ahead, it can do all of the things that we've heard. But what about the island-wide shift in travel, and particularly as electric vehicles become more and more part of the fleet?
Sure. So we've got a sustainable transport policy that was signed off by the States Assembly in March 2020. So that one's been sort of formally adopted by the states. And that really sets our decision-making principles for trying to address the so-called traffic problem, you know, at the highest level. There isn't a sort of silver bullet that you can sort of introduce that will suddenly cure, you know, St Helier, and particularly the peak times of all the sort of peak hour congestion. But you can sort of chip away at it incrementally with every decision that you make through things like the planning process, introducing projects in the public realm spaces, for example, providing things like cycle parking facilities, etc. So we work to those decision-making principles. So it's one of recognising that fewer motor vehicle journeys are good for Jersey. So it is very much about demand management. Implied within that is the basis that we will not be creating any additional capacity for motor vehicle journeys. So it's about making best use of the infrastructure that we've got. In the instance here, it's for motor vehicle journeys in particular. So we'll try and create additional capacity for cycling and walking and public transport to make them more attractive alternatives. We know that if the island's population is going to increase, they are the only things that we've got scope for growing. We can't fit more water down the same pipe, to use an analogy, when it comes to the increased number of car trips. So the potential we've got for you know, moving more people around the island has to be through the sustainable modes. There's 10 principles in the sustainable transport policy. They're in there on page 26. I won't read them all out, but that's essentially the set of guiding principles that we follow to try and essentially make Jersey's transport more sustainable.
Yeah. Let me just make another observation for your comment on as well, which is one gained over, I say, quite a number of years, and it's there is a love of cars and motorised travel, isn't there? You see a very fine collection of supercars around motorbikes, and this is one of the few locations on the island where people feel they can let rip, and as a result, it's pretty noisy and it's a very hostile environment. And I just want to understand if that is a Jersey-held perception, and also whether, from a highway authority's perspective, you've ever looked at that and thought, do you know, that's not quite right in a 21st century society. Surely it needs calming and dealing with and quietening down.
Yeah, I'm sure you can appreciate there's quite a long list of things we'd like to fix with transport. So we have to prioritise according to need. So we'd look at things like road traffic accidents, for example, when sort of targeting our resources as opposed to maybe intervening with dealing with sort of noisy vehicles in particular. One thing that I think is going to happen in the future is with the electrification of vehicles, Jersey has mandated that there will be no fossil fuel vehicles sold new to the island after 2030 through the carbon neutral roadmap. That will have the effect of effectively, over time, reducing the noise problem from traffic as the fleet turns over, and you won't be able to import essentially noisy petrol vehicles. Then over time, I'd expect traffic to essentially quieten down in line with that electrification of the fleet.
I've probably sparked quite a few questions now.
I've got a couple of other comments on the broader approach to cars in particular. I think the STP is definitely now biting on the development industry and the approach that's being taken, and I think not too embarrassed to say, I think we have lagged a little bit behind other jurisdictions in relation to the way that has arrived as a policy tool. But there is a lot of momentum now, and there's momentum across other government initiatives as well. The carbon neutral roadmap has, very clearly identified reducing the need to travel, not just to remove bottlenecks from a network which is reaching capacity, but the other threads that government can introduce policy controls over and establish priorities are aligning to the very same objectives of the STP. I think it's also fair to say that the market expectation within the kind of world of development is slowly evolving as well. Over time, there has been a clear acknowledgement that the adopted car parking standards are no longer fit for purpose, and there has been, I'd say, a period of a decade, a general acceptance of the introduction of a maximum requirement for car parking to support sustainable travel objectives, and that has been informally coming down and down and down. Horizon is a permission from a decade ago, approximately, and that has a 0.7 provision, and that has been successfully successful in terms of its sales, but based on a position a decade ago. So the market has adapted in line with the way that evolving policy is gently pushing expectations. So these things are biting.
Interesting.
Just if I could come back to the safety one, because you raised the issue of speeding vehicles in particular on this sort of stretch of road. We do work with the police who are responsible for enforcement of speeding vehicles, who run the occasional campaign when the sort of focus arises, although they obviously have to prioritise amongst their competing objectives. But there is quite close partnership working with the police in terms of the safety outcomes that government wants to see with respect to its road network. There's always going to be the occasional, motorbike that will put its foot down, but
It's not the occasional.
Help for 108,000 registered vehicles on the road in Jersey.
108,000. Is that true, Mr. David?
I think that's the number that have been registered. I don't think that's the number of actively circulating vehicles that we know are on the roads. I think that's numbers close to around about 70,000. So it's best guess. No one's quite sure.
Crikey. 70,000 odd vehicles.
There are other policy kind of columns within the government's work streams which are, again, slowly pushing on those. So I'm about to digress, and after trying to keep everyone on track for the last few days, there has been no requirement for MOTs in Jersey, and that is being it is a work stream for government through commercial vehicles first, and so legacy issues in relation to the number of cars generally, irrespective of one person can only use one car at once. The legacy issues are being addressed through other policy work streams within government. I just wanted to touch on it again, this issue of the way that the network is used by some people. The introduction of the at-grade crossing, it is itself a traffic calming feature within the middle of the middle of the road, and that's all part of the loose term of de-engineering that piece of infrastructure, which comes through the landscape proposals that we've spoken about as well.
Yes, although some will use the green light as a sort of grid start moment, won't they?
I'm sure there are other government work streams that might want to address that.
Okay, right. I'm sure there's a few
Can I just make a couple of comments from the planning perspective, if
Yes,
possible, on
of
this?
course,
Thank you. Yeah, just briefly, the statement of common ground between the two transport engineering sides, the parking strategy, car parking provision, is shown to be set by condition. I think it's important that that actually forms part of the planning obligation agreement rather than just by condition, because of the importance of getting this information right. And the second thing, of course, is that the submitted drawings indicating the car parking provision are for illustration only. So we don't know what we're actually approving in this scenario. So that's why it's important that the parking strategy is a planning obligation agreement.
Well, we've got session 14 on that. I've just made a note on my paper, so we'll pick that up
So
later.
if I might helpfully kind of preempt what we discussed there, in the DAS, page 317, is a tabulated structure setting out the phases, setting out the nature of the spaces, and as with the residential mix that we discussed before, we are quite happy to commit to that on the basis that that is a maximum level of car parking, because going beyond that would deviate from the position that's been discussed between the technical teams. So we are quite happy. I might just follow up the second point that Mr. Jones raised in relation to the kind of volumetric approach to the areas of car parking. As with the residential units that we discussed this morning, do they fit in the spaces identified? The same work has been done. You know, this provision volumetrically fits into the spaces which are identified for that provision. The final layout is a detailed matter, but we are entirely comfortable that the space on a kind of wholesale basis works.
Okay, right. We're going to go to questions on parking. Mr. Young.
I'll try to follow your model, sir, and start with the detail and then finish with what I think is the wider context, briefly. The picture I've picked up there, obviously I haven't followed all the detail because I haven't been able to spend time on the papers like everybody else. But basically, we've got a development proposal here which has got a considerable reduced number of car parking spaces available within it compared with past, particularly we mentioned there Horizon and so on, which was higher. And so I think that what I didn't get was the, if you like, how that would be shared between public and occupiers of the new dwellings and commercial users. Could I take it that this is just basically, there's a kind of going to be a free-for-all situation of the 384 that has all to be shared out by, first come, first served, as it were? I'd like to know that, or is there any division there between what you might call dedicated car parking spaces and those available for the general public? I think because that's quite important, because there's one big issue, it seems to me, is that yes, I think obviously all directions of travel indicate lower car ownership for town residents for all sorts of reasons. One supports that. But of course, town residents do both, not only, as Mr. Vibert said, need to go out and enjoy the beauty and lovely places of the island. And of course, I don't think that just saying, well, it's all right, you've got a cycle path, that's okay. I think the public transport network is still, it is much better, but it's still capable of improvement. And so I think, the need for public who are living in town to be able to go out and enjoy the amenities of the island, because after all, that's what the island's planning policy is. Look after the rest of the island and put most of our development in the town area, and try and try and make it as best as possible for a place for people to live. That's basically our government policy. So I think part of that means that we have strategies in place that if people can't have cars or they got nowhere to put them, that there is equivalence in the public transport networks. And the other thing is not just people living in town going out to enjoy the natural beauty, it's visitors. I mean, do we want to, I've heard stories of people feeling isolated, particularly elderly people and people with mobility problems, because they can't get visitors. I mean, the area of town, for example, to illustrate, I know pretty well, because I've been a member for it for 8 years or so, is St. Billard's. And I know St. Aubyn's a lovely place, a wonderful place. And of course, it's a tourist hotspot, and it's, there's a real absence of parking there. For people who live in St. Aubyn, people might have to park a mile away and walk to be able to go and see their elderly folks and so on. And so I think that's another side of the equation when parking provision is considered as for what's been made for residents. And I think that's, so I think it's a question of how that 384 is kind of managed, needs to have some greater clarity. And of course, I think one question which may be a legacy issue, but we have had, within this development or this plan is 2 new office blocks, I think. Now, there's been arguments over this before. The office blocks that we've now produced have got dedicated underground spaces. Now, I ask the question, if we are going to have general vehicle parking policies, shouldn't that apply to every development? And are we proposing here to provide, again, because of the commercial pressures, dedicated car parking spaces underground in those office blocks? Because that actually not just goes against the policy, but it also puts demands on, we have to create a road network, and it shapes the whole movement of traffic. So there's that. Now, on the last point, I don't accept, you raised, sir, so I feel like I wasn't going to raise it, but I feel you introduced it, so I can speak briefly on it, about the wider context. You're absolutely right, sir. I think your views on the way that St. Helier is, I believe, destroyed by the failure to manage traffic is absolutely right. You're a frequent visitor, you know it well, sir. But you are spot on. And I've lived in town, I know what it's like. I don't live in town now. And it's a choice that people make. You either tolerate it or you hate it. But I don't think it has to be that way. We don't, sustainable, what we've said here is, I heard from the government experts, is that what I've written down here is, well, this development is based on the business as usual approach at the moment, that we've got this traffic, we can't interrupt it, we can't delay it for more than a minute, we can't inconvenience it, so we have to devise our developments around it. I don't accept that for 1 minute, sir. I think we do, we've got a document called the Sustainable Transport Strategy. I was a member of the States at the time. I voted to support that because it was better than nothing. But my God, is it good enough? No. We need to do much, much more. We've now got the technology. We could have congestion charging to limit the unnecessary trips into town, to allow bus taxis and priority and disabled people to be able to move in town. We could have that. The technology is there. I argued for it, but our previous ministers wouldn't go with it. But it can be done. What other community would allow its major city, because St. Helier is the equivalent of our major city, to be so impacted by uncontrolled management of vehicles coming freely at any time of the day? I asked that question. So I think, sir, that we got here the business as usual strategy. I think fine words for Mr. Nicholson about, well, it's going in the right direction because of carbon neutral. I wish I could be confident. I really do, as a member of the public. So I put that. I'm sorry, there's the comments. If you want to challenge me, by all means. But you did introduce it, sir, so I feel I can get away with it.
Thank you, Mr. Young.
Thank you.
Just might come back on a couple of points there very, very briefly. This application is so far from business as usual. There has been no comparable approach to the promotion of sustainable travel through any other planning application. I'll be brave enough to say of this nature throughout the entire history of applications in Jersey. None, sir. Second point is, Mr. Young has got a range of views which are way, way beyond what this application has the ability to interact with. It might be worth a career in politics, Mr. Young, to promote some of these things through the Assembly.
I didn't introduce it. I don't think you expected it. But you're right.
My task is to be inquisitive. Okay. Right. We've got
So one more point, the public-private split, which was the other point we...
It was given earlier, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was indeed, and they are segregated, so it's not anyone can use any. There is a segregated provision for the public car park of 335 spaces that would have a different barriered access and obviously ticketed system, and then the separate for the residential side. The public parking is split with 140 spaces under the Waterfront garden, so an extension to that existing car parking, and then 195 were proposed to be via the basement parking on Rue de Tay. So a split. We also mentioned there was additional public motorcycle parking. I don't think I touched on that earlier, but just to 283 spaces for motorcycle parking also to be re-provided and increased. So just to address that split is definitely within the proposals, and then the visitor parking is able to use that public car parking within the development and the wider area.
Actually, just a follow-up question on the resident parking. It's quite useful. In terms of, with the provision rate being obviously less than one space per unit, how space is allocated? Is it just if you can afford one, you get one? And is there a cap on how many you can have per unit?
I think those are points of detail to be determined during the detail stage. What the proposal is to do something that's being done for the other developments recently, like Horizon, that it's decoupled from ownership from the residential units.
Just to add on the car parking issue, and just to follow Mr. Young's line of inquiry, a lot of these details, I mean, he's quite right that how the car parking works on this site is going to be pivotal to the sustainability overall of the entire site. We'd want to encourage the optimal use of the parking spaces and discourage things like long-stay commuter behaviour in favour of supporting things like disabled people and the retail element of the town centre, for example. We've asked the applicant to provide a detailed car parking management strategy as part of a planning condition, and Mr. Jones has suggested possibly via a planning obligation agreement as well. So this will need to be agreed afterwards to ensure that essentially whatever parking policy is adopted on site in terms of both residential behaviour and public behaviour pulls in the same direction as government policy, so that we can ultimately realise the aims of the sustainable transport policy.
Yes, so I mean, we've heard a number of references in the course of the week to the £1.7 million penthouse in the Horizon, and so somebody couldn't just say, oh, I want 10 spaces.
No, that's controlled at the moment in Horizon through the sales process, and so it's the responsibility of the developer to avoid situations like that. We are quite happy with the approach that the regulator has outlined.
So that management plan could deal with somebody that's disabled and has an absolute requirement for...
Correct, yep, exactly those things, yeah.
Okay. Okay, Mr. McCarthy, on the subject of parking. Sure you're going to stay focused, aren't you?
I am. Well, let's hope so. I go back to the lack of information. Everything's, yes, we will promise. Look, when you submit a planning application, you submit an access statement. And within that access statement is the management plan. And in that management plan, it says what we've just been asking. So what we're dealing with, this car park, there's 12,000 car park spaces in the whole of St Helier. So it's getting on to 10% of all car parking spaces in St Helier. This is huge. And the question I've got is about, apart from who gets the car parking, there'll be many other issues which aren't covered in this application: fire, escape, air pollution, many things. This in itself, this car park, is a huge EIA subject on its own, which hasn't really been covered at all. So there's that. The second thing is about access, and I don't know, I couldn't see on the drawings. Do you park your car and get in the lift and go to your apartment?
That is an option. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would not have that. That is a fire risk. That means the air pollution, what you normally do is bring people to the grade, they stop, and then they go across. So what you've got is a fire tunnel. The second thing is about the moving in, is future-proofing this. This has a design life, at least, let's hope, 60 years. So when you're planning, when you show us a plan, it's got to be future-proofed, if we're talking sustainability. And as we well know, car ownership will drop. In 2025, we've got driverless vehicles. We've already got buses that are driverless vehicles. So car ownership will dwindle. And with that, what are we going to do with this enormous hole in the ground, which we've dug out contamination and dumped it on our shoreline? So the question I've got is, are the floor-to-floor heights adequate for alternative uses? And I think that needs to be presented, because we're probably talking about 5, 10 years where a lot of the space will be empty. The other aspect is the charge. What's happening in most cities is you pay business rates and home rates for car parking spaces, £15,000 a year. So what it is clear, we're going back to the subject of affordable housing. What do we mean by affordable housing? They're just surviving. They're just about paying the bill. And if they can't pay that bill by that last pound that week, they go into debt, and then they go into the spiral. So we need to put this into context of the whole subject. 100% affordable housing has been delivered by the government or even by communities where there is no provision. There is no need for the car parking, apart from grey car parking for those with disabilities. And I think, therefore, the question is, I have in my mind, this is at a very expensive, it's estimated it will cost £70 million to dig this hole to build this car park and treat the contamination before you even started building the car park. And that's a lot of money. The question I've got, if there was a 100% affordable housing scheme, how many car parking spaces would you actually need against affordability? And run this comparison. And would we have more affordable housing if there wasn't a deep basement for parking cars? So the question I've got, we're not presented with these alternatives, which are all part of the environmental impact assessment work. So the public can go, yeah, okay, it's fumes or homes that are affordable. And the public can then make that decision. But we don't have that information provided. It's take it or leave it. Thank you.
Okay. Did you want to respond?
I'm not sure I'm able to get to a position that Mr. McCarthy will be content with, if such a position exists. The basement is not just car parking. There is a great deal of other activity accommodated there. The storage areas for the units. There is servicing for the commercial elements of the scheme. There is also residential stores, etc. So it's not just dig a hole to put cars in it. It is quite a long way from that. In relation to fire, I see we've got the fire service here. I'm sure if there's anything that needs correcting, they'll be able to do that. The basement is not just about delivering a big hole for cars. It's integral to the whole strategy of removing cars from the ground plane, delivering an environment which we've discussed in relation to the prioritisation of the pedestrian. And I think most fundamentally, we have a situation where car parking is being slowly reduced from the extremely high levels that some schemes have seen a decade ago as part of a strategy which doesn't simply remove parking. It is a balanced approach in line with the objectives of the STP, taking account of all the other things that the application does to support active travel.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Nixon, while you're talking, I've got to give some comment on in my report on some of the representations I've received, and I don't know if you saw the one by Mr. Beddoe.
This is from a couple. Yeah,
It's on the
4th.
It's document WR2 on the inquiry documents list. Now, I can almost anticipate your answer on this, but I've nonetheless got to give some comment on it because Mr. Beddoe's made quite a detailed submission, and it's probably wrong to sort of sum it up, but he's basically saying you don't need to put a basement car park in, you can use Lower Park. Now, Lower Park is actually a listed place, isn't it?
Yeah, Mr. Beddoe promoted a planning application for this Lower Park project a few years ago. He's not here, so I don't want to do him a disservice, but it was aesthetically and technically incompetent. It was a complete non-starter. He was proposing a deck on the Lower Park to re-provide the park at the same grade as the inner road arrives at, so that the road goes, doesn't follow the dual carriageway. And he would have re-provided the park on a concrete deck so that the lower level was effectively covered car parking within the park. It was a
Flight of fancy, you think?
thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
The department offered some pre-application advice along those very same grounds.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, right. Anything more on parking? Right. I think we could probably do accessibility and emergency access, and then we'll take a break before we get on to that chunky issue of connection. So, we've got representation by the Ambulance and Fire and Rescue Service. I don't know if you want to come up to the table. You could pull a chair up and you could share a mic there. Perhaps we could start with some introductions. I remember you, Mr. Gavey.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Peter Gavey, Chief Ambulance Officer. I'm Ryan Hall from the Fire Safety Protection Department.
Well, good morning, both, and thank you very much for coming along. I don't think this needs to be a particularly long session, but we're dealing here with a very major development. It is an outline application, all matters reserved, so there's plenty of scope for, if the Minister were to grant permission, for incorporating conditions and agreeing details at a later stage. But I think when you are considering issues of accessibility, emergency access, it's at this very early stage that it's important to get some input, because once a design is set and something's built, it's all a little bit too late. I'll go to the applicant side, really, just to explain a little bit about the work that they've done on this subject, and then we'll take some contributions from the Highway Authority and yourselves. So, would you like to pick that up?
Well, sorry, I was looking at something else at the moment.
Sorry, so we've read the responses from the two services that I identified, and
Would you rather I just go straight to...
I think so.
Yeah.
To hear their submissions first, I think we have a
And you will then
I think we have
respond.
a general consensus that these are design matters and will be dealt with at the appropriate stage of the application. I don't think there is any deviation in matters of principle, but please, sir.
Okay. Well, should we do Mr. Gary first on ambulance issues? I mean, I take it you've looked at the plans, have you, and had a...
Yes, and obviously high-level plans are difficult to get into some of the detail around that and how the impacts might be on emergency response. But I thought it was probably worth just picking on a few areas. We've given just a general response in regard to that, and we'll obviously work with the planning department, the road authorities, and the applicant if needed in the future to ensure access. A lot of it is around, for us, access to buildings. Our crews are made up of 2 people, so being able to park vehicles very close to entrances to access for whether it be accommodation or business ventures is important. There's a lot of kit to carry in and get out, so it will be good to understand further that as any development, if agreed, goes forward. Consideration, really, a lot of these areas, space for ambulances to park safely. We are aware already that the areas such as outside Castle Quay on the development at the moment is often a place for the public to pull up on pavements and delivery trucks. We would add to that if there's no space for emergency vehicles, as we would have to pull up on the pavement outside to make it accessible. So it's just to give consideration to those sort of areas of concern. That area does give some concern at the moment, as you enter past Castle Quay, where the number of vehicles, and I think it was mentioned earlier, it's not particularly well policed, and therefore it can be problematic to overtake getting around a bend with cars down one side. Bollards was another thing that can be problematic, whether that be blocking access for cars but allowing access for ourselves, time it takes to remove them, and obviously if they prevent parking. Well, I've mentioned already about the current area. In regard to the single carriageway into the site, and we picked up, we believe there was only one entrance and exit from the site currently planned. We may have missed something there, but currently there are a few more areas that could be used, albeit not necessarily official. But in regard to a road traffic collision or a fire in the area, it is likely the emergency services would block the road from a safety perspective. You don't want cars driving past while we're trying to work an accident. So it's just that consideration given to what would happen, particularly if there was then an investigation afterwards that could lead to the road being closed for several hours. So it's for consideration, really. I was also keen to understand a bit more about how the corridor for pedestrians through the active travel corridor through La Route de la Liberation would work. We currently control the traffic lights around the hospital area and coming out the bottom of Gloucester Street, and we know we've done some work on that because there can be delays caused by those lights being held. So when they change to green, they hold green while the emergency vehicle goes through. They're controlled from our control room, not from the vehicles or automatic. If there are ambulances and then fire trucks going out one after the other for a significant incident, there can be already blockages down the road, and just would like to understand more of that as the development plans come to fruition around how that active travel corridor would work with the traffic lights at the end of Gloucester Street. So coming out of one, would we then be blocked by the other? How long would it take to change? Will we be able to change those, and impacts on costings and things like that for the services? And the last point probably on there, well, there's a couple actually. One in regard to the delays mentioned earlier, minute delays, what impacts would that have on emergency response? So ambulance response times for category 1 calls are 7 minutes. That's not a lot of time to get through, so any delays are of interest to us to see how that impacts. And then finally, just access with any basement space. Large ambulances don't tend to go into the basement space themselves, so just making sure that access and egress for staff carrying equipment, having to get people in and out of the building, particularly the basement areas, is sufficient.
Okay. To respond.
Yes, thank you. All very useful. We've got your feedback in writing to the consultation stage as well. Just a few things. Vehicle parking on Rue de l'Eto, I think that's been a long going, it's an issue that's been going on for several years, particularly the little pinch point outside the coffee shop. Without wanting to point any fingers, it's a parish policing matter, so they're the authority with the ability to do something about that. It's their road. Mr. Hayward's nodding. We have a representative from the Roads Committee with us today. Sorry, he's not representing the Roads Committee, but perhaps he might feed that back. Access to the basement, we are very conscious of that, and there are kind of oversized lifts which we're putting in for ease of access for the cycle facilities. There's more than one of those. They're dotted through the scheme, and we look forward to reviewing those in the detailed application stage. The other point was Gloucester Street and your very clear need to control that junction at the end to get the vehicles out. I think we've all experienced that, and in dialogue with the owner of the rest of the road network, I think if that control mechanism needs to be extended to any other points that are introduced, that is all for discussion, sir. I don't think there's any problem in terms of the progression of the application on those points. Fully understand their desires.
Just so I could understand the way the development would work in terms, Mr. Gary, a sort of typical blue light emergency, heart attack, stroke, or whatever you're called to one of these properties. I'm assuming that access through it's essentially a car-free development, isn't it? But the ambulance would be able to get to the front door of the block of apartments, and then be able to use the lifts.
Yep.
Okay. And how would, I mean, we're into detail, but that would obviously need to be managed in a way in which others couldn't abuse it, that access mechanism.
Agreed. Yep.
Yeah.
As with any other element of low car streets in town. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Mr. Gabby, I think, I think you can leave on the basis of understand you've made those points. Yep. They are a lot of them very detailed design matters, and they will need to be taken forward if permission's granted. And I'm sure there'll be plenty more dialogue on that basis. Fire issues, fire and emergency issues.
Okay. Our position is we're kind of we're happy to comment, but we are acting on the public and firefighter safety is our kind of stance. But by being consulted and meeting with the developer at an early stage, it gives us the opportunity to discuss the areas that need to be considered based on our knowledge and involvement in the subject matter of fire safety. With the utmost to-date information from our colleagues in the UK and through the National Fire Chiefs Council and through the following national developments, especially from the Grenfell inquiry and the reform to the building and fire safety legislations in the UK, we deal with the consequences of the fire happening at the planning application stage and not the risk of it happening, especially with the developments in high-rise residential buildings and buildings above 11 metres. We haven't had the opportunity to directly consult with the developer to date, but only through the planning application portal process, which is provided on the Planning Register online. Early consultation will then ultimately give an opportunity for design layouts to be discussed in addition to the access and facilities for firefighting. Several areas that need to be considered in relation to the design layout and access, such as public areas only, the pedestrianised and open green spaces, access roads and routes for emergency services, vehicles and safe working distances from buildings and protrusions and overhangs, the building heights, and location of fire hydrants, which are the water supplies and access to them. Other areas to be considered within the realms of facilities for firefighting are as follows, which are the water supplies, continual volumes at a good rate of flow and rapid access to it. The consideration to be supplies sprinklers to both the buildings and to the basement car park. High-rise building fire strategies encompassing the fire engineered solutions. And importantly to this is access to within 18 metres of all main entrances to the buildings where firefighting facilities will be expected and around the peripheral. Other considerations are the contaminants of water runoff and its drainage, particularly having to deal with a basement car fire is the amount of toxins and the other nasty products is where that water's going to go. Basement car park size and volume of the vehicle, and more recently, I suppose, with the risk posed by the EVs in the fire department, so EV vehicles, electric vehicle fires are particularly challenging. They're new developments to which industry hasn't managed to catch up. And so they don't take hours or minutes, they take potentially days to fully extinguish. And access for vehicles and machinery to remove damaged vehicles. And also an important consideration is the capacity of the local fire and rescue service and the time it takes to respond and intervene and the capacity that we have and the ability to deal with high-rise incidences.
So there's a lot of detail there. I think in one of your email responses, you mentioned an issue about access to the beach as well.
Yes, so originally the consultation was, it was Jason Masterman who did the consultation back in February 2022 through the planning application stage. We have since then been invited to make further comment more recently, to which as you've had the detail. Jason can't be here today, but I'm kind of acting on the behalf of the Fire and Rescue Service. So yes, and then another alternative is our actual operational commitment to outside of the development. Currently, the La Frigate is our rendezvous point for incidences out at the castle, where it could be a holding area before taking some. So it's just another wider consideration, which we'd only kind of noted by the plans or the proposed removal of the slipway and an access to that. Further to comments made by Jason and the Fire and Rescue Service, I noted on Friday that some other plans have been submitted in terms of vehicle access. Again, this is about engagement, and we would like to work with the developer. So it's not opposing, it's about working in collaboration and understanding the demands and the requirements of the Fire and Rescue Service. And we would like to work. And I know there's a lot of detail that's probably needed, and it's probably not at this stage, but when it goes through planning into builder control, but it's those early considerations, because we don't want to go from one stage to another for it to then be kicked back. So that early engagement will help kind of iron out those issues early on. But kind of looking at the initial, again, these were plans that I think they went in on the 13th onto the planning portal, which show like a network of where emergency vehicle access is. It's great to see there's been some consideration, but there is further consideration needed, particularly when one of the other plans show the main access entrances to the buildings, particularly the residential, is that the road network won't get us to those areas. But again, that's through consultation with the developer. We're happy to engage and assist.
Okay, anything from the applicants team?
Well, thank you very much. Mainly, I'm not sure what drawings you've got there, but I don't think there's been anything uploaded to that time frame. I think the Planning Authority are nodding in the background. The fire service were the first consultee to respond to any of this, and they set out in very brief terms that there was no objection, on the understanding that the building control stage would need to have direct engagement with the fire strategy proposed by the applicant, and that remains the case, albeit as with so much of what we've discussed today, there is a desire for more information at this stage, and there are some perfectly valid points that have been raised by the Fire and Rescue Service, which will be fed into that.
Yes, they're appropriately flagged at this stage.
Yeah, very useful.
I think it might be worth just to add as well that
although obviously there's a lot of detail in terms of fire access to work through, there has been some kind of high-level tracking that's been done for fire and refuse through the blocks that's fed into the parameter massing, so we're content that there is access through the master plan for emergency vehicles.
Okay, right. Well, I will take some quick questions if there are any on this, but I think you can probably guess what I'm going to write on the basis of the contributions that I've heard. Mr. McCarthy is the only one indicated. Thank you both.
Just the site plan showing the roads up. Is that possible?
Can that be done?
The applicant has the electronic.
Oh, sorry, we don't have access to these screens. That's Delta's.
There's a plug-in.
But I absolutely agree that obviously this is an outline planning application, and
Right.
And that you're not trying to get the detail on the table. But what was stated by the inspector was what you want to make sure the envelope of the buildings you're showing, everything can fit in. And I think the point's made very well. Fire, control, escape, emergency is big space. It requires another fire lift. It requires zoning. It needs walls in car parks and separation. It's big. It takes space. And that's not shown on the drawings. So what is important is, I just want to say, the comments that are being made, it would be impossible to say that everything can fit in unless the work has been done. Like separating the lifts as you come out of the car park where a car is burning for 2 days, that you don't share that with the same shaft that goes up to people where they're sleeping. So I think, anyways, that the points made, I wouldn't brush them aside to building control, and it'll come up, pick it up later as a reserved matter, is it doesn't protect the public's lives. The other aspect I want to pick up on this, unfortunately in today's paper, there was an accident, a serious accident and a fire, a car accident. And what it did, it closed the road. And because I was going back in the taxi last night and they diverted it, was closed at 3 o'clock. And I don't know when it was reopened, but it's probably, not open till the next day. So it happens, these accidents. This road, that there is only one road, and I have to point it if you don't mind, because it's very difficult to see this plan. Sorry, I'm going to shout that. This is the development here. And what you've got is this road that goes off to the harbour. And from that harbour, you have 2 ferries, one ferry that takes people and the other ferry that takes hazardous material, toxic material, chemicals, fuel, dangerous stuff in tankers. And they've only got one route, and they drive through here. Furthermore, this site here has 3,000, 4,000 people of all ages, some people have got illnesses, they're all living in here. If there is an accident here, a simple accident like what happened on the main road, nobody is going to be able to get in or out by vehicle. So if you had the unfortunate coincidence you had a heart attack, at that same time, you're dead. That's it. Why are we doing this? Why are we presenting, a scheme that is a death trap for 6,000 people? Why are we doing it? We don't need to. And the fundamental thing is it starts off with, when you start a design, you go to the fire brigade, you go to everybody and you ask them what their concerns are. And you address their concerns and you come up with a solution. But no, when you said this, I forget the term you used about that, member of the public submitting that idea for that car park, what was it called? You referred to it as a dream, or, that you just said earlier. But anyway.
I asked if it was a flight of fancy.
Flight of fantasy. Thank you very much. Flight of fantasy.
Fancy.
The old scheme is a flight of fantasy. Why? Because it doesn't make sense, it's stupid. Well, you have insulted that individual, and I'm now going to insult you, because you cannot name a scheme that would ever be accepted anywhere in the world where you have 6,000 people and only one route into the site and out of the site for emergency vehicles. They don't exist except here. And you have to ask your reason why. Because this is a government project, and this government can do what it likes. And I say, therefore, and to change that, and to provide another route, is a redesign. It isn't something like, oh, we'll put another road up here. You have to go back to the drawing board and start again. But if you start again, don't start with this team, because you'll be back to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy.
So if I might bring the attention of the inquiry to your notes provided as to how you intended this inquiry to run, sir. One of the points which is quite clear is that all participants should address you, not the public gallery. That's the first point I'd like to make. The second point is there are wilder and wilder accusations coming out of Mr. McCarthy. We could deal with the corrections of matters of fact. We will be here well into the evening. This is not benefiting the purposes for which we are gathered. Initially, the idea that 6,000 people are living there, this is beyond needing a response, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. I do agree with some of your sentiment. I know Mr. McCarthy well over a number of years, and he is actually a lot more succinct than some of his earlier submissions to me. Points well made, and I would remind Mr. McCarthy of the job I've got to do. I understand the passion. I understand you have some strong views about the states of Jersey, political decisions and different organisations. I do listen, but my task is set out in terms of reference, and I do say to people regularly, if I'm not writing anything down, you're probably not hitting the target. So for it to go into my report, it's got to be related to the application made, the evidence before us. Let's.
I do have one other point, sir, if it.
Please.
Sorry, unless there are further public comments on these issues.
I don't think any were indicated, so carry on.
In the earlier conversations, we discussed public car parking, and the planning authority identified through your prompt the South Western Helier framework and paragraph A 1.5 with the discussion about 520 public car parking spaces. We set out the position which is agreed with the development authorities, the Highway Authority, in relation to 335 spaces. That is, I believe, the primary submission, and unless otherwise prompted, it's the primary submission and probably the only submission we want to make. We think that is positive in relation to all the objectives of the STP. A fallback was identified, which I think you should be aware of, sir. So the car park at Marina Gardens is a two-level car park. At the moment, it is two-level. The upper floor is public car parking. The lower floor is private contract parking at present. And the ability exists to increase the amount of public car parking to 520 spaces simply by changing the tenure of that lower floor of car parking. So if there is a public obligation for 520 spaces, that can still be delivered. That is not our primary submission for the reasons identified. But as we were talking about school capacity yesterday and changing the catchment areas, we have the ability to change the catchment, if you like, in the car park to deliver 520 spaces, which I hope, for the reasons we've debated today, is not what you...
When you say change the tenure, from what to what?
It's private contract commuter parking on the,
right,
on the lower ground level. And it could be brought into short-stay public car parking if there is...
Do you have the number of spaces on that lower level?
We could send someone to go and count them at lunchtime, but it is certainly sufficient to add to the 335 and get in excess of 520.
Okay, no need for that, okay. And when was that built, just out of curiosity?
I've got it in the front of my... It was completed in 2000.
I've got to say, it's a very good example of a discrete car park. You barely know it's there. And it stood the test of time then, if it's... because it's quite high quality, isn't it? You walk through there, you don't
Yep.
get the...
I think it's had a lick of paint in the intervening
Has
period
it?
and some light bulbs updated, but yeah.
Actually, what as I walked, I did walk through the decks there. Is that, Mr. Nicholson, is the feel of, you know, what I would experience walking through there, is that going to be the sort of feel of the basements that would be in this development?
Subject to detailed design, the basement's obviously larger, but that car park is a JDC asset. It sits below the gardens, and you know, in terms of the management, maintenance, etc., I see no reason to suggest otherwise.
Clean, tidy, well lit. Those.
Yes, sir. Yep, through the JDC management.
Okay. Mr. Viber.
If I can raise a matter for the fire and health people, because we've moved on quickly.
You can.
I believe Mr. McCarthy raised a point that I think is important, that we ought to hear from them, from fire and health, as to whether they see what he raised as being a problem, and also from infrastructure, as to whether they see it as a problem, which is just the one road in, what's happened in the event of a serious blockage to that road.
Okay. Well, I don't know if they want to come back up again to answer that, or whether you can speak loudly from the back. So,
The people listening online, but
sorry.
the people online will not be able to hear their own.
Okay.
Do you just want me to offer the infrastructure view ahead of the emergency services, or?
But by all means,
Yeah.
Mr. Hayward's.
This is something we've considered when looking at the transport implications. I can't speak on the exact operational requirements. I'll leave that to my sort of colleagues over there in the emergency services. It's my experience in blue light situations that those vehicles can pretty much go where they like when the blue lights are on the roof. So there's a lot of large, wide landscaped areas throughout the development that typically would be occupied by pedestrians. So in a sort of, well, I'm going to say worst case scenario, they would simply just drive down the public realm spaces rather than have to abide by the traditional traffic laws on the highway network to access where they needed to go.
And I think also, was I hearing about, what about where you had an instant where the road was blocked in and out of the development?
Yeah, so in that situation, we don't have the sort of drawings anymore, but there's, depending on the exact location and nature where the vehicles needed to access, it's similar to the refuse vehicles. They would use the internal roads within the development to get there. So I'm speculating now because a lot of this is very much detailed design, but it's anticipated the crossing on the route to Liberation will be at grade. So in practice, there'd probably be nothing stopping an emergency service vehicle sort of turning into the development through that location, as opposed to having to use the route to Port Elizabeth.
Okay.
That's exactly the intention, sir. That's as the team have explained. These matters are part of the early design stages, and I've just been reminded that Trenton Square it does exactly that. The ability exists in blue light. If there is an emergency, it's an emergency. The vehicle's coming in. Yeah. The space is available.
Okay, we're going to stop for a break there. Looking at the clock, it's 25 to. We'll have 10 minutes. We'll restart at 1:45. I do.
Can we hear from the fire people and the health people?
If there's anything they wish to add, you've got a mic there.
I'll just add on that, take on that comment on board. I think it's a fair comment to make. Again, it's a lot of detail, and it's the assumption that there is an incident on that road network. Again, it's through further consultation and discussion and looking at the greater detail when it's published and it goes to the further stages, that those things will be kind of taken on board and considered. But yeah, that's something that's been highlighted, and we'll factor that in as well to our further consultation.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Young.
I think that there's been some reports in the press about. There's been some reports in the press. I think we've seen about problems with electric vehicles being parked in underground basements. Could we hear from the fire service briefly as whether there's any issues there we need to worry about for this, or is that?
To be fair, I think he did address that issue.
I beg your pardon.
He did explain that electric vehicle fires are challenging.
I think I'll just add to that, and what's happening in the UK at the moment. So it's through the Home Office of the Zero. One of the Home Office departments and the National Fire Chiefs Council are currently looking and working on guidance, because what we lack within the built environment, and it's not just nationally, it's globally, is around particularly basement car parks and electric vehicle fires, and it's the suitability and how to make that safe. Our local building control authority are already trying to be proactive and look at that. And again, we're waiting. And this work's it's imminently coming out in terms of guidance.
So it's a work in progress.
But it's not just a local issue; it's a national, it's a worldwide issue. But yes, you're right. I mean, electric vehicle fires are a challenge for any fire and rescue service, particularly when they start. It's the thermal runaway, and they don't just take minutes to put out. It could be hours, it could be days, or you may be able to initially put the fire out, but the batteries continue to decompose, and then they continue to support combustion, and they can burn for days. So then that's the issue is if the vehicle fire is in the basement, it's an electric vehicle fire, it's how that vehicle comes out, and then how it's dealt with after that. But equally, it's the jet of flame which can come from it. I think it was back in 2017 in Liverpool, the car park.
Remember it well.
Which 1,100 or so fires. They do spread, and that's where fires in car parks have changed over the years, because the composition of vehicles, they're not what they were before, different fibres, and again, it's the amount of toxins that they release, and water runoff is one of the considerations to be made.
So I'm grateful for that. I think it's good to hear that in the public, and also for the public record. I think it does not just talk about building control regulations and how you construct these underground car parks, if we're going to have them, but also how they're managed in use. It strikes me as being a relevant issue to this application, if there's a work in progress that's likely to have some impact. But thank you for
Okay, well, let's have a 10-minute...
I think that was very well answered, but it is worth also adding the heat that we're talking about and the damage on the structure above, the supporting structure for the building, and whether or not after such a fire, if the structure will be affected, and then the people above would not be able to return to those homes. But the other aspect, which does affect the volume of the building, as you stated, we've got to make sure the number of homes can fit within the envelope they're proposing, is this issue of single staircases to flats. We're taking this very seriously. We are going to reduce the height to 11 metres for means of escape on a single staircase. And that's, but at the moment, the scheme has single staircases, which exceeds that limit. So I think it is the protection of the public, public from harm is an ongoing discussion. And I can't believe that this developer has not spoken to the beginning of the journey, which is talking to those people in the front line of protecting people's lives. They are up to date.
There's a record of this on the planning register.
But I'm saying the statement was made that they were not involved at the beginning of the project. And I think that's terribly important for the record. And therefore, all of these things, and then the comment was made, that's brushed aside in the response from the planning department that says, oh, it's a building control issue. We'll look at it later, we'll stick some pipes in and... No, you start with them about how on earth they can go in, save people's lives, and control a fire. And out of that, you come out with a solution. But instead, what you've got is a planning application, as I've repeatedly stated, that you put it in, and oh, it's all going to be okay. It's a flight of fantasy, but we're going to sort it all out after the event with building control. It's not possible. Thank you.
Mr. McCarthy, it's an outline planning application.
Yes, but it's about, can you fit?
It's an outline planning application, and these matters are being raised at a suitably early stage, which is why these gentlemen have come along. Thank you. Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break, coffee break now, and then we'll come back and we'll complete the transport session before the lunch break. Thank you. Okay, let's get going again. So we're going to move on to this really important issue, which is about connecting the site to the town centre. There is a very long history to this, and I think one of my first encounters over here in Jersey was a planning appeal when the planning appeal system had just been set up in 2015, and I was hearing all about the master plan ambition to put the road in a tunnel and have this sort of seamless transition between the town centre and the waterfront development. And I made some comments at the time that it all looked a bit ambitious and undeliverable based on what I was hearing at the time. And I think subsequent to that, the then Environment Minister undertook a review, and out of the end of that popped the Helier SPG that we've referred to many times. I think it's fair to say that whilst the putting the road in a tunnel is kind of part of history now, that objective of connecting the town to the waterfront remains. And we've already heard a number of contributions this week around, you know, the 6-lane motorway, as it's called, and the connections across that. And we've heard some this morning about how that the main pedestrian crossing would work. So I just want to explore that, and I know there are going to be some comments from interested parties on this, but we'll take it in the usual order. I'll go to the applicants team to really just sum up their evidence and their position on this connection issue, and I'll go to the Highway Authority and Planning Authority if they wish, and then I'll open it up, and I may ask some questions along the way. So over to you, gents.
Thanks very much. I think we had some slides that we were going to share on screen at this point, just to explain a bit about the background to our approach on the road. Don't know if everyone can see that. Okay. I think I'll say a bit about the kind of master plan approach and the design approach that we've taken, and then Dan can pick up on some of the more kind of technical highways aspects of it. I think you've given a good introduction there in terms of where our starting point was with the SPG, which sets out the expectation to heal this severance of the road, but also the issues with the previous plans to sink it. The SPG mentions considering a landmark bridge as a potential option, and that was our sort of starting point in terms of the design. So the image on screen now is one of the early iterations of the master plan. You can see we were looking at a kind of what was referred to as a land bridge that linked across these two, from the public space on the east side of the road to that main pedestrian access down to the waterfront. And this was something that we took to the JAC early on in the process, and they had a number of issues with this. I think in terms of its being a very sort of overly engineered solution, very high carbon cost, and also in terms of the impact that it has on the road, that it results in the master plan really turning its back on the road, and if anything, kind of exacerbating the hostility of that environment as a pedestrian and cycle environment. So although it helps kind of connect to the waterfront, it increases the damage of the road itself. So they challenged us then to go and look at how we could instead seek to de-engineer the road as far as possible. The approach that was taken there was in looking at the setbacks from buildings to allow more space for pedestrian and cycle routes, more space for buffering with tree planting. That was combined with an at-grade crossing, and also we were tasked with looking at how the distribution of public space through the plan could help outside of that road corridor could help create this sequence of spaces and help kind of heal that journey to the waterfront and connect across the road. And the part of that was that was really where this creation of this sequence of civic squares through the heart of the master plan came. So creating this spaces on either side of the road and then linking down to the waterfront square. And we were interested in how the kind of distribution of uses around those squares could create this very interesting, sort of diverse, varied journey that sort of drew you down to the waterfront. And also created these spaces which I think there was a lot of discussion about wind and sunlight yesterday, but these are spaces that really, in terms of the block massing and the way that these have been developed, they have been looked at in those terms as well, and provide very very, very high levels of sunlight and good shelter from the wind. So we felt provided very sort of usable spaces that don't really exist currently on the waterfront in St Helier, and help kind of create that connection across the waterfront. In terms of that kind of de-engineering, we looked at this with Dan, WSP, and with IHE to look at what those options might be. I've mentioned the kind of setback of buildings and the creation of cycle and pedestrian routes and tree planting, which is what you see in the plan today. We also looked into the possibility of narrowing the road and what that might look like. And there's some visualizations that were done here. These are sketches that were done kind of early in the process. So obviously the building form has evolved quite a lot from here. But this looked at what happened if you were able to reduce the width of the highways. It's something that, in terms of reducing the number of lanes, was not considered to be feasible at this time. I think the JAC feedback from the last session that we had with them actually recognises as well that this is something that does need to be looked at as part of a wider infrastructure strategy. But it is something that we have considered in developing the design for the road in terms of making sure that it is adaptable and flexible and able to change its character in the future with changing traffic patterns and changing need. So that really is what's led to the master plan. I think this is from the original application. It's largely unchanged since then. So we have this at-grade crossing, the greening of the central reservation along either side of the road, and that increased setback with pedestrian and cycle routes. It might be worth handing over to Dan if you want to say something on the discussions that you've had with IHE on this.
Absolutely, thank you. So I think, as we've said, a huge amount of work's been done on this, and in May 2021 we undertook a roads review following that challenge from the JAC, and I believe it's been shared as supporting information today, the technical note that draws out on that in terms of the traffic modelling, the engineering and the optioneering work that's been done on that. The conclusion from that work was that there is a huge amount of journeys through that corridor that are not just into St Helier, but they're through that area. They're very strategic in nature in terms of serving La Colette, serving the harbour, serving onward connectivity to and from east and west and the area. So really saying that there is a good 37,500, 40,000 movements through that corridor per day on average.
Sorry, what number?
About 37,000 movements, that's annual average daily traffic. So it's a huge number. A large proportion of that, as I say, is through traffic. Not that, so therefore the development has so much within its gift to do and to change in terms of the land uses that we have within the site itself, but a huge amount there of traffic that we don't have a ability to control. We've had extensive conversations on this over that time with IHE to determine what we can and what we can change and what we can influence. We obviously have the sustainable transport policy to support decisions and to in effect chip away at those numbers and the ability to change modes. But it was determined that the type of traffic and what we could do was outside of the scope of what we could pick up as a development. We did look extensively at options and did take those very, very seriously in terms of testing them and through what that might mean, from a completely at-grade road throughout that whole area into single lane, into two lanes with the grade separated, Castle Street Junction, for examples, and looking at all of those interventions. And it did find that any one of those in operation would cause huge congestion levels and knock-on impacts onto the economy and viability of island life, not just within that area. It also begs questions of how you would ever construct that and pay for it, as well as complete asides. But we have done that work, and it's documented in that evidence base. To get down to something like 2 lanes from the 3 lanes, it cites in excess of 30% reduction in traffic flows at those peak times. So we are talking significant numbers. And when you draw back that down to what the development is doing itself, introducing very minimal, circa 150 trips at peak times, a very small proportion of that overall traffic impact comes from the development. So in summary, again, a lot of work that's been done, a lot of numbers and analysis that we can go through, but it really draws back onto the propensity to change modes, which there is some, a propensity to retime journeys, again, which there are some, potentially to reduce travel, but there is very little, if nothing, for people to reroute journeys, which if you were de-engineering a road of this size within a different context or jurisdiction, you would expect traffic to reroute onto alternative routes. And that's not something that we have within the context, because what is in effect the Northern Ring Road is very congested, and there are no other opportunities for those types of trips to continue. So the balance that we have done through that engagement with IHE has been to say, what is the best that we can achieve whilst not impacting too heavily on existing journeys? And we've got to that balance of providing that connectivity through the enhanced new crossing over Route de Libération. We've got the enhanced Castle Street Junction with improved zebra crossing facilities, the Dutch style, as an example, roundabout to improve that cycling connectivity, and also the improvements at the Gloucester Street crossing, which will become at grade compared to the existing sort of stepped access and ramped access that it is at the moment. So multiple points that would connect between the waterfront part of the site and then the Esplanades part of the site, but also then on to town as well. So really drawing a balance of multiple access points or crossing points that are easy, signal controlled in many instances, at grade and direct, which are all the things that are not there at the moment. So we've got that, as colleagues indicated, the central reservation is shown to widen to not only increase the sort of separation of traffic to enable the planting, but also to give that look and feel of the road itself a slightly different sort of environment that you've got. So a little bit more like Rue de Port Elizabeth in terms of that tree-lined boulevard. And also obviously the speed limit being 30 miles an hour. So we've already alluded to the junction, or the changes with the junctions and the crossings, and obviously the impact on journey times being balanced in the wider context of island economy and life. So apologies, I've probably gone on a little bit too long there, but just to give a flavour, really to say it's not something as a team and a project team that we've taken lightly. We have done extensive work and assessment in what we could do in the short term. And I think concluding really it's a case of we've gone quite a long way to what we feel is a solution that works in the short to medium term that then doesn't preclude something coming forward at the government's discretion into other projects in that future term. So not prejudicing any future changes that could occur through increased modal change.
Okay, thank you. If I could ask a couple of questions, first of all. You say there's a note that was produced in response to JAC, and that's it. I haven't seen that previously, have I?
You have not, no.
No.
That's something following the session yesterday we felt that we could try and share as supporting information.
And that captures basically what you've just explained.
It does.
Okay. Now, In terms of that, you talk about 37,000 movements daily running through this corridor, but of course, leading into that corridor, it's all 2 lanes, isn't it? Coming in and 2 lanes. You've got the tunnel and going out. So.
So the tunnel, just to add some context to that, the tunnel's taking circa 26,500 vehicles a day, and the profile of that is pretty flat throughout the day. So it shows that, you know, as soon as you hit sort of 7, 8 o'clock, it is pretty much under or sitting at capacity throughout the widest part of the day. And then if you go out to Beaumont towards the west, you're circa 28,500 vehicles. So we've got a huge number at either end. We've obviously got in the middle sort of a merging of multiple. You've got the avenue, you've got the inner road at West Park all condensing in. You've got Gloucester Street coming in from the north and Mulcaster Street coming down from the south, and obviously the port and traffic from La Collette. So it's that merge point of multiple routes, but the A1 route, if you like, is sitting at around 28,000, so about 10,000 short from what we see through that centre section.
You went on to say that in this note, which I'll obviously have a look at, that you tested different scenarios, and one was taking 6 lanes down to 4 lanes, and you said with these options it created significant congestion. And I think I wrote down the figure. You said you'd need to reduce daily traffic by 30%. So that 37,000 that you talked about, you'd need to cut that by 30% to make a 2-lane.
To get down to something with 2-lane, with still the underpass in place, and obviously if Castle Street then came down to grade, you're talking of much more extensive changes. Even those numbers were still introducing circa a 15-minute delay on journey times through that corridor.
What delay?
Circa 15 minutes from the modelling in the PM peak, as an example. So we are talking of extensive impact.
So let me. This is important stuff. I need to understand this fully. So, if we were to flick a switch and we just had 4 lanes operating there and adjustments to it, and the existing traffic volumes were on there, the 37,000, what would that mean in terms of congestion and delays?
I'm just trying to... I think that brought us, sorry, to clarify, that brought us to the almost 500% increase in journey times, which was the 15 minutes. With the reduction to 30%, that brought us to, I think, about a 3-minute increase in journey times. So I'm just trying to find the right things on my screen.
Right.
So with the reduction...
Effectively find cut-throughs. They go north and they cut across country, and you get a lot of people using rat runs and so on, which causes a lot of upset. That's what actually happens. So we are, you know, in a rock and a hard place. And I think it's probably, and what I didn't realise that all these options have been analysed technically, because certainly, as I said earlier, favoured very much having the option, having a land bridge within the SPG. And I can understand the rationale that's led to that. I would like to ask, I think the state's transport planner highlighted the fact that it would need, if we were to assess, if we were to try look at what, you know, the consequences of reducing the road, the number of lanes down, and creating a delay in journey times, that this would need an economic and a social impact assessment, and I can understand that. I wonder, has that been done? Or is it just a question that, you know, the state's members, the minister's gut feel is that this is something that we should just close our mind to and not even prepared to look at? I think that's a question, as whether or not that impact analysis has been done. Because it might lead you to the point, well, you know, which is more important, the quality of life for the people who live in town and the island, or the island's economy? And you know, this island is wedded to its economy. You know, it overrules everything, including the environment. So that's a major policy issue. And I tend to think that what was said, it's a political, you know, I see this, it's a political choice. So what are we being presented with? Well, the application obviously is on the basis that the political choice has been made. We can't have those in the short to medium term, I heard, the short to medium term, which I don't know what that, I think I'd like to know what that means. Does that mean 5 years? Does it mean 10 years or what? But it doesn't prevent the longer term, we were told. Mm-hmm. But I do think approval of the plan would prevent the land bridge, because there would be nowhere for the landing place for or the whole thing would need to be designed around a land bridge. So it seems to me that this application would close the door on that option. And I think, you know, the scenario is if the approaches being made don't work, we'd have closed the door and we've stuck with the level of traffic. And no politician has ever prepared to have the courage to face on introducing restriction measures to reduce those flows of traffic, to achieve that 30% reduction, because I'm certain they'd get kicked out of office. That's the nature of Jersey politics. They say you wouldn't survive. If that is the case, then it does bring the question of whether we should be looking at having a bridge link. Because, you know, we're facing that reality now, that it's never going to happen, that we're never going to get that calming, and we're just going to have to, and that's, you know, we're going to base the whole future of this area, that the traffic levels are going to continue as they are, and we can't, you know, I can't believe that in, you know, 20 years' time that somehow magically people are going to agree to reduce the road widths. You know, the increase in population and the amount of activity. So I think it probably boils down to a strategic choice. And I don't know, you know, so putting it as a question, I think I've had a lot of my questions answered in hearing, that the analysis has been done, though the economic and social impact has not been done. I'd like to know whether there's been a real political decision of the states on this, whether there's been a decision of the states to make this decision, because it seems to be really important. It's right up there at the top. The whole, as Mr. Stadden said in his introduction, he can recall doing the first planning inquiry, which was burying the road. But of course, that wasn't the only other option that was around in those days. The other one, which is now gone, and this illustrates the point I'm making, that once the developments happen, you close the door on options. And Graham Howarth and Howarth Tompkins, in their review of Waterfront 2000, proposed ramping up the land on either side of the road during the landfill phases to allow a gradual increase in height, so that you create effectively that you know, you don't bury the road, but you reduce it to a lower level. That was their plan. That never happened because of the cost. The states won't live with it, and it's too late now. That the door that's closed because we've developed the area. That's not possible anymore. And I think the same will be of the engineered solution. I'm disappointed because I was in office in 21, and I don't recall the Jersey Architectural Commission ever bringing this issue into a political discussion. I think it's really important. You know, I can see why their ideal would be is don't have an engineered solution. But if the ideal is never going to happen, then, and you know, was it right to rule it out? I don't think so, sir. I don't know. Look, I'm struggling to put questions, but this issue seems to me just about the most important issue in the whole future development of St Helier, because there's the damage that's been done by a road. I don't know, sir, you've ever. I've done it once, and it's crazy to try and cross that main road of all those highways, trying to get across there at night or something like that. It's just it's terrible. It is absolutely scary, and I think the point you made is that driving around Jersey, people are very constrained. You've got these big, fancy, fast cars people love having, but the only place you can drive them anywhere and really put your foot down is on this stretch, and that's what people do. It's the one place in Jersey where you can put your foot down and enjoy the power of your vehicles. And I can't see that behaviour. I think that behaviour I can't see it changing. It's in people's mindsets. It's terrible that it is, but it is. And that means that does lead me towards it. Are we right to reject the engineered solution of, including a land bridge, which I like to think with modern architecture could be superb, could be absolutely fabulous. Really, I'm not a designer, but I'm sure brilliant minds would come up with some wonderful characteristics. So I think I've said enough. Thank you, sir. I don't know is there a question in there? If it's a political choice, has the states made that political choice, or is it for you, sir? Is it left to the planning inquiry to make that political choice? Maybe that's the question, isn't it?
Well, so my task is to obviously make an assessment and commentary against policies and the SPG. And I've got some of it in front of me, and I'm going to... you can stay there, actually, while I'll just read a bit out. I'm looking at the St Helier Planning Framework, SPG, and we've got community expectation at 3.8, which is on page 10. And it says community expectation is to feel a reconnection between the town and the sea, and between the community and St Helier's heritage, to be enabled and encouraged to move freely between the town, the waterfront and the ports by foot, cycle and other means. And then I'm also looking at the St Helier public realm and movement strategy, and again that talks a lot about the bridging the ring road, and it talks about a strategic concept seeking to address severance caused by the ring road that will enable transformative change in movement patterns. And I've got to give commentary in terms of what I've heard here about does it deliver that transformative change. It certainly delivers change, but I think as we've heard, you've still got that road there in its current dimensions and current function and current volumes. And I absolutely accept what Mr. Nicholson says. It doesn't rule out change in the future. I did want to actually just expand this a little bit to talk about the quality of those connections and the number of them. Okay. And I was, yeah, thank you. I was also reminded of the contribution we had from the witness on education, who talked about the fact that there's going to be, all of the school children that will live in these properties will have to, in some way, navigate across that 6 lanes of traffic. So, applicant, just talk me through that in terms of that quality of movement and that reconnection.
So the re-provision or the provision of the new crossing over Route de Libération is a wide single stage, so the child in which case can press the button, the green man will come up and they will cross all lanes within one movement. They don't have to wait in the middle, they don't have to wait terribly long for the green man to come up. They would walk straight across within a very short period of time at grade without any stepped accesses. If they choose to use that new wide connectivity. The central reserve is wide. Should there be any issues where somebody doesn't get across in one fell swoop, but the provisions there in terms of times. So we've got a safety backup, if you like, in terms of that wide planted central reserve. But the concept is they move through one movement all the way across all those lanes if they use the new crossing. If they were to go up to the Castle Street Junction, and again they're on foot, they would get to the existing zebra crossings across effectively the slip roads. Again, they could use those and straight across. They're slightly improved, and the connectivities through that junction are improved. We're also putting in new crossings on the Castle Street arm and the Rue de Port Elizabeth arm. So again, zebra crossings across that area so they can have access across that full area, even better than it is now in terms of the priority. If they're on cycle, the new crossing will be cycle as well as walk, so again, all the way across on their bikes. And if they're at the zebra crossings or the Dutch-style roundabout, then they could navigate onto the Castle Street junction and navigate that segregated facility. We've got two options, as I touched on earlier. One is that Dutch-style arrangement, which would be fully segregated around the circulatory of the roundabout. The other option is a shared cycle walking facility around the junction as well. So two options. But in essence, today, if you try and cross the road, you've really got Gloucester Street or Castle Street junctions. If you're at Gloucester Street, you're again waiting for the green man. You've got steps or ramped access. You've got to wait in the centre to finish your crossing. So a huge improvement that you'll push one button at grade, walk all the way across all lanes and to be to the other side. We've also shown improvements to the Gloucester Street crossing as well. And obviously we have the other signalised crossing points between Gloucester Street and West Park, which are largely unchanged by our proposals, but could have improvements to the times that they're called. Obviously signals have a couple of important items, one of which is how long does it take for the green man to be called up, which could be shortened, and obviously how long it allows you to cross the road, and again, safety factors enabling there. So the idea is into the future, it's a seamless access to and from either side of that road for both walking and for cycling.
Okay, just a few follow-up questions on that. The main crossing then, this single phase, you press the button. We talked about driver delays that would result. What about as a pedestrian? I mean, I'm very familiar with the existing crossings. They are really annoying, and you feel about that big in the whole sort of hierarchy of movement. You wait in turn, don't you, until all these cars have whizzed past. And Mr. Young says if you try and step out of line and do it when you haven't got a green man, you take your life in your hands going across there. It is quite hostile. So anyway, your new crossing is in place. You press the button. How long have you got to wait before you can walk?
We've assumed less than a minute within the modelling that we've done. There are obviously tunes and points of detail that can be clarified through the detailed planning permissions on exactly what that might look like. And it could vary at times of the day. And again, that would come down to discussion with Highways colleagues in terms of that impact. But the sort of circa 1 minute delay that we've suggested through the modelling, that was the assumption that we've got in there, that you would wait a very short amount of time to then be able to cross.
Okay, and you have safety assessed the press of the button, and vehicles are going to stop.
Obviously, it's law that they should. Obviously, we're talking around how it works now. I've personally not experienced an issue of a vehicle not stopping at that location. It's a 30-mile-an-hour. It's going to have that look and feel with the tree-lined avenue of a very lower environment. If you look back at traffic speeds, I know lots of accusations today about excessive speeds. If you look at the average traffic datas and the average speeds, they aren't significantly above that 30 average, maybe because of the congestion times, but it is a relatively adherence to the speed limits, and obviously there are issues that could be taken up with enforcement if there are issues, but obviously drivers are bound by the Highway Code and the Roads Act to follow the red signal. So I can't say for everybody, but that's the premise that obviously we work to, is that people follow the rules, and we give safety margins where that may not be. So obviously the light goes red, there is a set amount of time before the green man then comes up for people to cross.
Okay, thank you. Two more questions, and I'll open it up. The first one was on that, I think you've answered it. You probably tell me if you have. Would you be comfortable with that population of school children using the crossing points? Would you, do you think they would achieve the safety concern that the education officer clearly raised?
I think what we've shown, and all of our work goes through the road safety audits, and that's something that we've said as part of a condition that would happen during the detailed design stage, and that would draw out any issues that the independent road safety auditors would have with the scheme. So, I'll leave them to assess that and inform us, but we have had safety reviews of the work, and the work that's come back has said that that's entirely appropriate. The timings of the signals, the safety factors within those timings are applicable. Obviously, that's for that new crossing. Obviously, the Castle Street Junction, loosely in its form, even into the future, is there, tried and tested. And obviously a lot of usage to and from Aquasplash, the gym, and the existing uses there at the moment as well. So I think we've got the split, we've got uses there, and we have the wide central reserve within the new crossing as well that has that ability, as we've said, the ability if people don't go all the way across in one movement, but it's within standard practice and would go through that safety audit would be my response.
Okay, linked question. And this relates to not just child safety, but connectivity. Because you wouldn't have any delays at all in terms of pressing the button if you had a pedestrian bridge over the carriageway. And thinking about what it says in the SPG, public realm document as well. Has that seriously been looked at?
Yeah, it was, as I mentioned, something that was the sort of starting point for our design. We looked at how that would work in terms of getting, I think there are a few issues with it in terms of getting levels to tie in. Obviously, you'd have to come up to a bridge level across those public spaces, which presents issues in itself with tying in with the surrounding context on the esplanade and the waterfront. This was something that was kind of backed up by the JAC responses that we received. I think I was just trying to find one here. I think they were, the land bridge at high level will not resolve the severance issues. They didn't see it as a single bridge across the road as resolving the issue, and they pushed us towards that kind of more an approach of de-engineering and improving the condition along the whole of the road. And I think that's the other thing that's key here is it's not just about the experience of crossing over the road, it's about the experience of moving along that road and improving that for pedestrians and cyclists. And when you use another engineered solution to solve an engineered problem, then you create an increasingly hostile environment in that corridor, and it increasingly becomes a canyon that will be unpleasant for people to use. Whereas the approach of keeping things at grade, increasing offsets, increasing greening, improves both of those routes. And I think that they are, obviously the link to the waterfront is important, but the link along the road is also an important consideration that we can't lose sight of.
I think just to add into that, there was the sort of issues with all users being able to use such a structure that as Macaulay said, that in terms of the gradients were causing significant issues. The ramps up either side could be very steep or require stepped accesses, which then impacts on disabled usage and cyclist usage. So there was extensive work done on what those options could look like, and it concluded that to provide something step-free at grade would be the most suitable for all mobility types, not just those able-bodied that could deal with those steps. So, and as we've said, trying to get it a solution that opened up the area for everybody and provided that, I think, it was certainly looked at extensively and found to have quite a lot of flaws or challenges to actually implementing something that was viable for everybody.
So just if I could add, to give it a sense of scale, you'd need to raise the bridge height to approximately 6 metres above the carriageway to enable double-decker buses to carry on along the road, and any other large vehicles, cranes, things like that, fire trucks, big things. To get gradients that are acceptable for disabled users,
It would be huge.
1 in 20 typically. So you're talking about 120 metres of ramp either side of that structure. So it starts to really impact on the public realm. And like Ms. Hyder said, that's got considerations for the amount of time it takes to get up those ramps, go across the bridge, and come down the ramps, as opposed to maybe waiting a minute at the side of the road on average for the green man to appear.
Okay, I've asked too many questions there. Let me go to, please, Mr. Mason.
Sometimes in Jersey it's best to go back before you go forward. There was a competition for a bridge around about 2000, attracted round about 50 entries worldwide. I went into it with Borough Hatfield, and it was started at the corner of Castle Street, and it finished by La Frégate. Absolutely ludicrous, ridiculous, expensive. Didn't even bother to enter the competition. It was on Webb at the time, and the chief director of Webb, John Scully, said, well, public are asking for a bridge, here's a competition, here's the price. Never happened. But to go backwards to go forwards, but Jersey's waterfront's a series of car crashes, okay? 1880, Coode, fantastic engineer, he proposed a two-storey connection that went from a harbour straight to the Royal Square, quite extraordinary. I think he knocked the island site down. Cost of that, 32 million. Again, States of Jersey, too expensive. Never happened. Fast forward to, I've mentioned it once before, on 1988 was crucial. Island plan, at that time, Albert Pier ran to First Tower. An alternative scheme came up, the full Carter scheme, for La Colette. Planning application was never processed. So in response, the government did famously switch from east of Albert to west of Albert. And Peter Thorne, late Peter Thorne, and another engineer, they drew a line from Harvard Park to, first of all, to kind of West Park, and they kept extending it, to the slipway. Big fuss because it was overpriced, but at least it was built. Then they haven't built the wall, they filled it with rubbish, but I lived at Century Buildings at the time, and it was 10 years of illegal dumping. That's where the toxicity comes from, and it's still there. And Andrew Kane will explain on Friday, far more than Chris. You listening, Chris? Andrew's having filled it with rubbish, and without things happen in Jersey sometimes, Friday and a Monday. The next thing is they put the road in, the big crossroad, the underpass. No buildings, nothing whatsoever. They solved a traffic problem, but we sit here today still trying to solve that problem. There is an answer. There is an answer. Freddie Cohen, he got as far as a tunnel with an underground roundabout, would you believe? And I think that's got planning permission. Am I right, John? It's already got, it's got planning permission.
Above ground works are approved, below ground.
Okay,
Not.
okay. Well, and then, sorry, the next date, important one, is John Younghugh. Webb was 1995 to 2002, and they did the first phase, which is generally recognised now. The lot of criticism aside, at the time, has been a good development, social housing down there. 2002, there's a thing called Waterfront 2000. Everybody on, all the great and the good, the talking heads, we were up at Victoria College for 2 days, with Haworth Tompkins from London leading it. And that's kind of, it was on the front page of the Evening Post at the time saying, look, this is going to take 20 years. It's going to cost us $500 million, and here we sit in 2023 with that come true. And what's happened, the recent car crash, we're in the middle of it now, was to extend it westwards, when all the good stuff, very good stuff, I mean, it's a firm like Edo, 20 years work into this, and 20 years later, they're on the team somewhere. They have to redo their own work. It's quite extraordinary. All I would like to say that I shouldn't be here. Tomorrow's the Vernigas at Vienna Biennale, and it's schemes from all over the world, 120 universities, and time again, you will see buildings over a road, over it. I tried that in town here. No, I was told building over a road is illegal. There's a law against it. It's kind of nonsense. John's referred to the best people in the world, and they are capable of that. They're capable of taking the site from the tunnel to West Park and giving us a building, giving us a scheme that buries the road, takes it out of the equation. Well, I'll leave it there. I shouldn't be here. It's another car crash.
Thank you. Right, we'll take a few more questions. I just want to take stock of time. I do want to finish transport before the lunch break, and I don't want the lunch break to be more later than 1:15. So we have one more item to deal with on the agenda, which relates to active travel, which I think will be relatively quick. But if people just keep an eye on the clock. Mr. McCarthy.
Sorry, I have to keep popping up, but there's only, I don't know, 10 people now from the members of the public. I want to help you just in comparing this island in the sense of its vehicles, as you highlighted earlier, and the UK. One is there's no speed cameras on the island. The other thing is we have night races, and this is on the track. So at night, they zap around the island, and they actually have harmed people, et cetera, so they're not going to stop at a zebra crossing. The other thing is that, which I think is important, about home deliveries. This is on traffic modelling, is a growing issue. But what I want to highlight is this road is a through road for the islanders that live outside St Helier. And your report is going to be extremely important because, as you said, you're going to write a report to the minister. Well, actually, it's not just the minister, it's to 3 members, government officials or politicians. And those 3 do not live in St Helier. So they're one of the through people. And their supporters in their community that have voted for them are the through people. So your report is going to be put in front of 3 people that depend upon their voters that want to drive through here at 30 or 40 miles an hour. They do not want to hear that they're going to, from say from Gorey to St Albans, they don't want to hear about a 5 minutes extra delay. And that's the reality. So your report on this is hugely important about the through traffic. We're also talking 1,500 people from this site only, but we've also got the other site, the Keys. So walking across, isn't that right? 1,500 people in the morning, 1,500 in the evening.
In the evening, it's about 1,600. In the morning, it was about 1,100 in round numbers.
Yeah, from your site, and then you add the other site. Should we double that? Well, yeah, it would be. But there's going to be continuous traffic. This is all at rush hour. So we've got a rush hour crossing this road. And I think those lights are going to be red for half an hour, as these people parade across during their rush hour, going to school, to work. So I think that is important, that's in the modelling. The other aspect is, where's the bus lane? This is future-proofed. Where's the bus lane? So that's one lane gone. Where's the analysis to include the bus lane? Where's the cycle lane? Now, this is a complicated road. It's not, it's three-dimensional, isn't it? So when there's traffic filling the underpass, what people do is drive over the top. They drive at grade. And then they come to the roundabout and they get back down again. But that roundabout doesn't have a pedestrian crossing. No lights, is there? So a child crossing there is good luck. Okay? So that doesn't exist in the modelling. That's a roundabout. Now, you well know, for pedestrians to cross roundabouts is extremely dangerous. What's better is a crossroad with lights. And that's what exists. And that's what this planning application has. So the other aspect, so I'm only pleading, please, what I would like, two things, if they could analyse for this decision-making. One is everything I'm saying about traffic calming and connectivity to the town, I'm sure the developer will put the hands up. We're fully behind that. It's commercially much better, isn't it, to have better access to town will increase values. It won't decrease values, it will increase values. So everything we're saying today, I'm sure we're all united on. But I would like to see two things. One is what happens, what's the traffic modelling outside? Because normally when you do the environmental impact on traffic, it's 9 miles away, isn't it? You model very far away of how it affects, not just at the doorstep, people's movements. So I would like to see, from St Clements to St Albans, and what's the impact for those people travelling those distances. But also at grade. And I refer back, and I do understand the bridge, but it's another engine, and quite agree, absolutely agree. This is a landscape-led project. Lifting people up in the air and back down again, I've seen kids just run across the road. They're not going to do it. So we got to calm it. And this is where we start with the very first meeting with the Jersey Architectural Commission in January 2020. 2.5 years ago. And they just simply talk. This is the most important aspect. Now, is the connectivity and the traffic. And what they said is, please don't create a traffic canyon. And it's a bit like me going to the doctor and say, well, I'm a bit overweight. And the doctor say, well, I'll tell you what, buy bigger trousers. That's what we're doing. And no, go off and do some exercise and make yourself fit. And stop driving to work and cycle instead. But I just wanted to get that across. These options haven't been presented. The other thing, and I hope that the Jersey Arc, under the SPG for the site, it states how important it is the developer works with Jersey Architectural Commission. And I hope this is material consideration if they don't. And they state that the optioneering stage is crucial in the plan, and seeing options engages the public. So please can this process be encouraged? That's it. So John's idea, bridge, fantastic. Here we are, here's a bridge. This is the cost, well. Next, here's if we put the road back at grade. This is it. What's it like? And then have a mature conversation with the public. And the other thing is they do stress, the Commission had suggested interim road calming options are explored, and that the vision includes an end game designed to encourage walking, cycling, and integrated green infrastructure. Now, this is a landscape-led design, right? Connecting the town. And sadly, and I don't want to overload everything, but I want to just show you a photograph of what the crossing is going to be like at this. Is that possible? You've got the picture.
I defer to the inspector on that.
Oh, sorry. There was one of the pictures of the
This
crossing.
was one of the images you
Yes, I asked for, yeah.
I emailed, and I don't plug in, but Patrick does, but...
If the inspector wants us to show that, we'll find that.
I think it was an image towards the end of the design and access statement.
Yeah, I've got that.
Will that one do?
No, it's not that one. It's the crossroad. It's where the pedestrians cross.
I think this is the
No,
CGI
I sent
image
it.
from the.
No, it's not the picture I sent. I sent the
Yeah,
actual
I
picture.
didn't know where your picture was from. It didn't tell me.
Is it?
I don't know, but it's an architect's.
Sorry.
It's of the crossing.
That's this. It's also the drawing we've had as well. So we both had the same.
Yeah, I think that's this one, isn't it? Oh, is that? Do you want to
That
show
one.
Yeah.
No, it's not that one. I emailed. It's not the picture I emailed the inspector, which I wanted to.
So
It's a critical one. It's. Or is it?
this is what I've been sent. I think it's this is a screen.
Okay,
grab,
well,
screen grab from
there,
the,
is that the?
video.
Sorry, there's a different angle, but is that the crossing?
No, this is the
No.
the existing Gloucester Street crossing that's enhanced.
Well, what can I do? I've emailed the picture. Which,
Yeah, this is from your email. This is the screenshot from that email.
no. Well, that's, so, have we got the image of the crossing then? 'Cause that's another. You know, you've got. This is a landscape-led design. One of the most important aspects is the crossing of the road. We agreed on landscape. Where is the picture that shows this crossing?
There's lots of illustrations.
I'm sorry, that's the one I wanted to refer to, because this is the critical. Otherwise, we just pass.
We are running out of time.
Okay, well, pass. I'll pass.
The new crossing.
The bit is with the. I have to go back. Okay, so with the developer and everybody, we all agree the connectivity is critically important. The question mark is, how do you do it? Now, what I have to go back to is the Jersey Architectural Commission, sorry, the Jersey Development Company, its memorandum from the government isn't just maximise the value of the site. It doesn't state that at all. What it says is undertake regeneration and strategic property development in order to derive financial, social and environmental contribution to the island and islanders. That's what your memorandum states, what you should do. Now, it also goes on to say, 7.17, demonstrate good corporate citizenship and a role model for other companies in Jersey. Okay? So what we're seeing as dealing with people and crossing the roads is the very best, this island, setting the standard. However, we've got young people at school being taught geography where they're taught about urban regeneration. And from their textbooks, urban regeneration is a comprehensive approach that merges vision and to resolve multifaceted problems, which includes such as road safety, air pollution, noise, quality, and the quality of life. So when we use the word regeneration, it's got to be better. And then you ask yourself is, how do you assess whether this is better? And I'm now going to end on the movement. And I'm not going to call up the drawings because I'll just get the documents. Here is 2 of 3 documents that cover design and access. Okay, access. So then we move into the subject. So trying to get across is it's all based upon, is this an adequate planning application? No, it isn't, says the planning department. The question is, where is it inadequate? Well, this is inadequate. The access statement is a document that explains...
Mr. McCarthy, I want to stop you there because... let you please listen to me for a moment. Before I opened this inquiry, I'd read your written submissions, your proof of evidence on the inadequacy, in your view, of the submitted documents and the environmental impact assessment. I've only written it down once. I'm not going to write it down repeatedly. You don't have to remind. This specific issue is around the connectivity to the town centre. Yes. You've heard from the applicant side. You've heard from the Highway Authority. If you want to make a comment on that I can write down, please do.
In the access, the access statement is a thick document. Okay, we've got about 5 sheets, and it's lost in the design statement. Okay, there is not they haven't submitted an access statement on its own. And an access statement goes beyond just pedestrian, it deals with disabled access. Now, disabled access includes only all disabilities, sight, sight and all ages, and also those with pushing prams and elderly friends, etc., etc. So there is just 2 diagrams. The pedestrian, there's only this drawing. It's only this drawing. It shows this is existing, and then it shows this is what's proposed. This is not an access statement. You know, where is the demonstration? It's improved from this to this. So all I'm trying to say is the public haven't been given the options. They haven't been given even the preferred option they're going with. They haven't provided the information where they can look at it, compare existing to proposed, and why is it improved for every level of ability. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McCarthy. We've got one more question, but you will be quick, won't you, Mr. Vibert? Because I need 5 minutes on the last item.
Thank you, sir. We've heard a lot this morning about cars and traffic. Haven't heard very much about pedestrians. And the Roads Committee is very concerned about the way in which people will be able to get from A to B to the waterfront. There's been a problem of connectivity ever since the waterfront has been thought about and developed. We've heard about bridges, tunnels, and the whole reason that's all been happening is because it's a difficult place to get to under the current circumstances with a highway. And anybody who walks around St Helier who wants to go to the waterfront has to scratch his head to decide, how do I do it? And that's now. What we're in a position of doing is looking to the future and saying, what will happen if the waterfront is developed as per the plan being put to you? Now, the people who live there will want to walk into St Helier. They're not going to drive into St Helier. They've got to get out of there. And the people who live north in the whole of that part of St Helier and all their children will want to get down to the waterfront to take part in and swim in the pool that's going to be there, see the art centre that's going to be there, sit in the varied open spaces that are there and be part of the waterfront. So there's going to be this huge pedestrian traffic, as we see it, unless we're wrong about that and no one's going to want to go there. And I can't believe that that's going to be what's going to happen. And we've got a situation even today where Liberty Wharf, which was where the abattoirs used to be, which was developed are finding it very difficult to maintain any form of business there, because the people who live in St Helier want to shop in the main streets of St Helier, and the people who live on the waterfront will want to go to those shops. And the worst thing about Law, sir, and I don't believe anything has been made adequate, which is to cater for pedestrians. And I think it's the enormous weakness of the case, because I don't believe that anybody has really considered the plight of the pedestrian, because they've been concentrating on the plight of car drivers.
Thank you, sir. Well, that probably leads us on to that last item, which is active travel, pedestrian cycling facilities and travel plans. Now, I understand on this matter it's a lot of common ground between you, and I think it's captured in your statement. But would you like to just set out briefly what the scheme would entail?
So the scheme in terms of cycling, we've got a maximum of 2,460 bicycle parking spaces across short stay and long stay. Just over 2,000 of those are long stay and just over 360 are short stay spaces. So huge levels of cycle parking. That's across as I've said, the short stay, the long stay. Within the basement parking, there is to be cycle provisions for all the residents, storage units for those, to be able to park securely and safely and to charge electric e-bikes. We also have accessible cycle parking bays as well, so those cargo bikes, those trikes, the sort of full breadth of those accessible options for cycling. We have public parking, cycle parking, charging as well across the ground plane, and we also have a commuter cycle hub, which is to provide not only for the site but for commuter cycle parking, so uplifting the current use of cycle provision on the site as well. So a significant amount of cycle provision in terms of safe and easy storage across the site. In terms of cycle routes, there's maintaining and improving the Route 1 cycleway alongside Route de Libération, and that upgrading of that to be a fully segregated facility as per the plans that show that, and obviously separate walking routes, so much more akin to the wider promenade as you leave the waterfront towards St Albans, if you like, for the feel of what would be provided. The crossings, as we've touched on earlier, over Route de Libération at the new crossing and as well at Castle Street are all to be cycle-friendly, meaning integration into town without having to dismount, which is what is there at the moment. And then throughout the ground plane, we've got those routes that enable people to cycle around the site as well. So a huge amount of improvements through there, not only the routes, the crossings, but also the storage.
Thank you. Mr Hayward, you are comfortable on these matters?
Yes, and when you get into the detail of a travel plan, it's really at the detailed design of the buildings in terms of, you know, who the occupants are, what purpose it serves, and how the trip patterns go to and from particular buildings. So that'd be at the point we'd get stuck into the details of those mitigations.
We won't do travel plan here and now, but we've got the conditions and planning obligations section. We'll pick that up there. There's a minute left if anybody wants to ask a question on cycling facilities.
Yeah, I just wanted to get some reassurance, I think, from a planning perspective. I know Horizon was approved a long time ago, but it's not yet complete, and occupiers are now taking the opportunity to use cycling provision, and the details indicated a horizon for cycling provision, much in the same way as the waterfront, are not working. The bike storage is inadequate and the storage areas are inadequate, so we just want reassurance, I think, because again this plan's indicative that what is being promised can be delivered, and I think it'd be useful to for the applicants to bear that in mind if possible.
There's some lessons learned examples. from elsewhere. Okay, well, we'll break at that point and resume at 2 o'clock. And at 2 o'clock, we'll talk about community infrastructure, quite a range of issues there, and drainage. And with an aspiration to finish by ideally 4 o'clock today.
Weren't we adding space to that?
Yes, in that first session after lunch, yes. Okay, thank you.